In the sleepy village of King's Abbot, a widow's death sparks whispers of poison. But when wealthy Roger Ackroyd is found stabbed in a locked room, the secrets unravel. I'm Dr. James Shepherd, your guide through a maze of lies where everyone's a suspect, including me. Hercule Poirot, the brilliant detective, hunts a cunning killer. But the truth will shock you. One narrator, one murder, one twist you'll never see coming. Dare to listen as the nightmare unfolds. Chapter 1. Whispers in King's Abbot village of King's Abbot lay nestled in the gentle folds of the English countryside, a place where time seemed to dawdle. Reluctant to rush forward, its cottages, with their thatched roofs and rose-draped fences, stood as sentinels of a quieter age, their windows winking in the late summer sun. The high street, a modest ribbon of cobblestones, wound past the butcher, the baker, and the small post office where news, whether true or whispered, travelled faster than the post itself. It was a village of routine, of familiar faces and predictable patterns, where the chime of the church bell marked the hours and the seasons turned with unhurried grace. Yet, beneath this tranquil surface, a current of unease had begun to stir, and I, Dr. James Shepherd, found myself at the heart of it. I am a physician, not by ambition, but by circumstance, and King's Abbot had been my home for nearly a decade. My practice kept me busy, tending to the ailments of farmers, shopkeepers, and the occasional squire, but it was my sister, Caroline, who truly thrived on the village's pulse. Caroline, with her sharp eyes and sharper tongue, was the unofficial chronicler of King's Abbot's secrets. She had a knack for ferreting out gossip, piecing together fragments of overheard conversations and half-glimpsed glances into narratives that were often more fiction than fact. It was Caroline who first spoke of the shadow that had fallen over our little world, a shadow cast by the death of Mrs. Ferrars. Mrs. Ferrars, a widow of considerable means, had died the previous night, found lifeless in her bed at the Larches, her grand house on the edge of the village. The news reached me as I returned from a late call, my boots still muddy from the lanes. I had been tending to old Mrs. Gantry, who suffered from a persistent cough and an equally persistent need to recount her youth. By the time I stepped into our modest home, the Gables, Caroline was waiting, her knitting needles paused mid-stitch, her face alight with the fervour of fresh tidings. "James," she said, her voice low but urgent, "Mrs. Ferrars is dead. They say it was her heart, but I've heard otherwise." I set down my bag, loosening my tie as I sank into the armchair by the fire. Her heart, Caroline? She was hardly 60. Fit enough, I'd say, from what I saw of her last month. Caroline's eyes gleamed. Exactly, James. Fit enough yet. Dead all the same. Annie, her maid, was at the grocer's this morning, and she let slip that Mrs. Ferrars had been unwell. Not in body, mind you, but in spirit. Guilty. Annie said, guilty about something to do with her late husband. I frowned, rubbing the bridge of my nose. Guilty? That's village talk, Caroline. You know how these things grow. Ashley Ferrars died over a year ago. Stomach trouble, wasn't it? Hardly a cause for guilt. Stomach trouble, Caroline repeated, her tone heavy with implication. That's what they said. But you know as well as I do, James, that some stomachs suffer more than nature intends. Poison, they're whispering. Slow poison, administered by none other than his devoted wife. I laughed, though the sound was hollow even to my ears. Poison. Come now, Caroline. This isn't one of your novels. Mrs. Ferrars was a respectable woman, and Ashley was sickly for years. You're weaving tales out of thin air. But Caroline was undeterred, her needles clicking again as she leaned forward. Tales, perhaps, but there's truth in whispers, James. Annie said Mrs. Ferrars was seen crying in church last Sunday, clutching her prayer book as if it might save her soul. And then there's the matter of Roger Ackroyd. The name stopped me short. Roger Ackroyd, the wealthiest man in King's Abbot, lived at Fernley Park, a sprawling estate that loomed over the village like a benevolent overlord. Ackroyd was a widower, a man of robust health and robust opinions, whose generosity, though not without calculation, had earned him the village's respect. He and Mrs. Ferrars had been closer than propriety might suggest, and the gossip had swirled for months that they might marry. I had seen them together at church, her hand resting lightly on his arm, his smile warm but guarded, if there was truth to Caroline's insinuations. Ackroyd's name in the same breath as poison was troubling indeed. "What about Ackroyd?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. Caroline's lips pursed, a sign she was savouring her revelation. "They say he knew something Mrs. Ferrars told him in confidence, and he overheard them at Fernley Park last week, arguing in hushed tones. She didn't catch much, but she heard Mrs. Ferrars say, 'I can't bear it any longer. I must tell someone.' And Ackroyd replied, 'You mustn't, my dear. It would ruin everything.' I leaned back, the fire's warmth doing little to ease the chill that crept up my spine. 'Caroline, you're building a house of cards. A woman dies, likely of natural causes, and you've got her poisoning her husband and confessing to Ackroyd. Let's not make mountains out of molehills.' But as I spoke, I felt a flicker of doubt. Mrs. Ferrars had come to me last month, complaining of sleeplessness. Her eyes had been shadowed, her hands restless, and she'd spoken vaguely of burdens she couldn't share. I'd prescribed a mild sedative, thinking it grief or nerves. But now Caroline's words cast her visit in a new light. Had there been something more? Something she'd hinted at but never voiced? The evening passed in a haze of Caroline's chatter, her theories, growing wilder with each retelling. I tried to focus on my dinner roast lamb and potatoes, cooked to perfection by our housekeeper, Mrs. Pearson, but my thoughts kept drifting. King's Abbot was no stranger to gossip, but this felt different. The air was thick with it, like smoke curling from a hidden fire. I resolved to visit Fernley Park the next day, ostensibly to check on Ackroyd, who had complained of a minor ailment last week. In truth, I wanted to see for myself if there was any substance to Caroline's tales. The next morning dawned bright, the sky a clear blue that belied the unease settling over the village. I made my rounds early, visiting a few patients before heading to Fernley Park. The estate was a 10-minute walk from the gables, up a winding lane bordered by hedgerows. The house itself was a grand affair, red brick and ivy-clad, with tall chimneys and windows that caught the light like polished mirrors. As I approached, I saw Parker, Ackroyd's butler, directing a delivery boy with a crate of vegetables. Parker was a tall, austere man, his face as unreadable as a closed book, and he greeted me with a curt nod. "Good morning, Dr. Shepherd," he said, his voice clipped. "Mr. Ackroyd is in the drawing-room. Shall I announce you?" "No need." "Parker," I replied, adjusting my hat, "I'm just here for a quick check." He mentioned a touch of gout last week. Parker's expression didn't change, but I thought I saw a flicker of something concerned, perhaps, in his eyes. "Very well, sir. You know the way." The drawing-room was a study in opulence, with heavy drapes, polished oak furniture, and a fireplace large enough to roast an ox. Roger Ackroyd sat by the window, a newspaper open on his lap, though his eyes were fixed on the garden beyond. He was a man in his early 50s, broad-shouldered and ruddy-faced, with a presence that filled the room, yet today he seemed diminished. His shoulders slumped, his fingers drumming restlessly on the arm of his chair. "James," he exclaimed, rising as I entered, "good of you to come, though I'm afraid it's not my gout that's troubling me." I smiled, setting my bag on the table. "Then what is it, Roger? You look as if you've seen a ghost." He hesitated, glancing toward the door as if to ensure we were alone. "Not a ghost, James, but a devil of a problem. You've heard about Mrs. Ferrars, of course." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "Caroline mentioned it. A sad business. Her heart, they say." Ackroyd's face darkened. "Her heart, yes, that's what they'll say officially. But between you and me, James, there's more to it. She left a letter." My pulse quickened, though I kept my tone light. "A letter? What sort of letter?" He paced to the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back. A confession of sorts. She sent it to me yesterday before she died. I burned it, James. I had to. But what she wrote, it's eating at me. I leaned forward. My curiosity piqued despite myself. What did it say? Roger, you can trust me. He turned, his eyes searching mine. For a moment, I thought he might confide everything. But then he shook his head. Not yet, James. I need to think. There's someone else involved, someone who... No, I can't say. Not until... I'm sure. I pressed him gently, but he was resolute, changing the subject to the weather and the upcoming harvest festival. I examined his foot, finding no trace of gout, and left with a prescription for rest and a vague promise to return. As I walked back to the Gables, my mind raced. A letter, a confession. Caroline's whispers of poison and guilt no longer seemed so fanciful. That afternoon, I saw Flora Ackroyd, Roger's niece, in the village. She was a pretty girl, barely 20, with her mother's fair hair and her uncle's determined jaw. She was shopping for ribbons, but her smile was strained, her eyes darting nervously. "Dr. Shepherd," she said, clutching her parcel. "Have you seen Uncle Roger today? He's not himself." I was just at Fernley, I replied. He's worried, but he wouldn't say why. Something about Mrs. Ferrars, perhaps. Flora's face paled. Mrs. Ferrars? Oh, I hope he's not. I mean, it's all so dreadful. Ralph's gone off somewhere, too, and Uncle's terribly cross about it. I nodded, sipping my ale. Fortunes make for dangerous friends, Hodges. Let's hope it's all talk. But it wasn't all talk. That night, as I sat in my study, a knock came at the door. It was Parker, his face ashen, his usual composure shattered. "Dr. Shepherd," he gasped. "It's Mr. Ackroyd. He's dead. Murdered." The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. I grabbed my coat and followed Parker into the night, my heart pounding. King's Abbot, it seemed, was no longer a place of quiet routines. The whispers had become screams, and I, James Shepherd, was about to step into a nightmare of my own making. The lane to Fernley Park was dark, the moon obscured by clouds. Parker's lantern cast flickering shadows, and his silence was heavier than words. We reached the house, its windows glowing like accusing eyes inside. The household was in chaos, Flora sobbing, Mrs. Ackroyd wringing her hands, the servants whispering in corners. Ackroyd's body lay in his study, a dagger buried in his neck, the door locked from the inside. The police were on their way, but I knew this was no ordinary crime. Someone in King's Abbot had secrets worth killing for, and I was determined to uncover them. As I stood over Ackroyd's body, I felt the weight of the village's gaze. Caroline would be insatiable tomorrow, her theories multiplying like flies. But for now, I was alone with the dead, my mind racing with questions. Who had done this? What had Mrs. Ferrars' letter contained, and why, in the quiet of King's Abbot, did I feel as if I were being watched? The hours that followed were a blur. Statements to the police, comforting Flora, reassuring Mrs. Ackroyd. Inspector Davis, a gruff man with a penchant for quick judgments, seemed convinced Ralph Patton was the culprit. "He's missing, and those footprints match his boots," Davis said, pointing to the muddy prints outside the study window. "We'll have him by morning." But I wasn't so sure. Ralph was impulsive, yes, but a murderer, it didn't fit. And then there was the matter of the letter, burned but not forgotten. Ackroyd's words echoed in my mind. Someone else involved. Who and why? As dawn broke, I returned to the Gables, exhausted but restless. Caroline was waiting, her eyes wide with anticipation. "James, tell me everything," she demanded. "Is it true? Is Roger Ackroyd really dead?" I nodded, too tired to argue. "It's true, Caroline, and it's worse than you think." She leaned forward, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "Worse? Oh, James, you must tell me. Was it poison, like Mrs. Ferrars, or something else?" "Something else," I said, my voice hollow. "A dagger, and a locked room." Her gasp was almost theatrical, but I saw the glint of excitement in her eyes. For Caroline, this was a puzzle to be solved, a story to be spun. For me, it was something else entirely, a nightmare from which there was no waking. As I climbed the stairs to my room, I thought of Hercule Poirot, the eccentric Belgian who had moved to King's Abbot a year ago, living in a cottage he called Les Fontanelles. I'd met him once, a small man with a waxed moustache and an air of quiet confidence. Caroline swore he was a retired detective, though I dismissed it as another of her fancies. Now, with Ackroyd dead and the village teetering on the edge of panic, I wondered if Poirot might be more than he seemed. Perhaps, I thought, he could make sense of this chaos. Perhaps he could see what I could not. But for now, I was alone with my thoughts, my pen scratching across the page as I began to write. This account, I told myself, was for clarity, a way to order the events of these dark days. Yet even as I wrote, I felt a shadow at my shoulder, a whisper of doubt. King's Abbot was no longer the village I knew, and one, James Shepherd, was no longer the man I had been. The words flowed, page after page. As I recounted the day's events, the whispers, the letter, the murder, I wrote of Mrs. Farrar's death, of Ackroyd's fear, of the dagger and the locked room. I wrote of Caroline's gossip, of Flora's tears, of Parker's ashen face. And as I wrote, I felt the weight of my own secrets, the things I had not said, the things I could not say. Not yet. King's Abbot slept, or so it seemed, but I knew better. Somewhere in the village, a killer walked free, their footsteps silent, their motives hidden. And I, the narrator of this tale, was caught in a web I could not yet see. The nightmare had begun, and there was no turning back. Chapter 2, The shadow of Fernley Park. The morning sun filtered through the heavy drapes of Fernley Park, casting long, dappled shadows across the polished oak floors of Roger Ackroyd's drawing room. I, Dr. James Shepherd, sat opposite the man, himself my old friend and patient, whose furrowed brow and restless hands betrayed a mind far from ease. The air was thick with the scent of polished wood and the faint, lingering sweetness of roses from the garden beyond the tall windows. King's Abbot, our quiet village, had been rattled by the recent death of Mrs. Farrar's, and now, as I observed Ackroyd, I sensed a storm brewing beneath his usually composed exterior. James, Ackroyd began, his voice low and strained. I don't know what to make of it all. Mrs. Farrar's death, that letter, it's all too much. He leaned forward in his armchair, his broad shoulders hunched as if carrying a weight too heavy for one man. His eyes, usually sharp with the confidence of a successful manufacturer, flickered with unease. I adjusted my spectacles and nodded, encouraging him to continue. As the village physician, I was accustomed to hearing confessions of all sorts aches of the body and burdens of the soul. But Ackroyd's agitation was different. It carried a gravity that made my pulse quicken. "What's this about a letter, Roger?" I asked, keeping my tone measured. He hesitated, glancing toward the door as if expecting an eavesdropper. "She left something behind," he said at last. "A letter addressed to me. It arrived yesterday. And, well, it's shaken me, James. She hinted at things, secrets she couldn't bear to keep any longer. Blackmail, perhaps. I don't know what to do with it. Blackmail, the word hung between us, sharp and dangerous. In King's Abbot, where gossip was the lifeblood of the village, such a term was as explosive as dynamite. My sister, Caroline, would have a field day with this, I thought, though I kept my expression neutral. Who would be blackmailing her, and about what? Ackroyd shook his head, his fingers drumming on the armrest. That's just it. She didn't say outright, but she mentioned someone knowing about her husband's death. You know the rumors, James. They've been whispering for months that she poisoned him." I nodded slowly. The village had been abuzz since Mr. Farrar's death a year ago. A sudden collapse attributed to heart failure, but laced with suspicion. Mrs. Farrar's, with her wealth and aloof demeanour, had always been a target for wagging tongues. Caroline, ever the collector of village secrets, had been among the first to speculate that the widow's grief was less than genuine. "And you think there's truth to it?" I asked. "I don't know what to think," Ackroyd admitted. He rose and began pacing, his heavy footsteps muffled by the thick Persian rug. But that letter, it's got me worried. If someone was bleeding her dry, and now she's gone. What does that mean for me, for Ferny Park? I watched him carefully, noting the way his hands clenched and unclenched. Roger Ackroyd was not a man easily rattled. His wealth, built on the success of his wheel-making business, had made him a pillar of King's Abbot, his estate a beacon of prosperity. Ferny Park, with its sprawling grounds and ivy-clad walls, was the envy of the village, a place where the elite gathered and secrets were whispered behind closed doors. Yet now, it seemed, those secrets were threatening to spill over. Perhaps you should destroy the letter, I suggested, though I knew he wouldn't. Ackroyd was a man of principle for all his bluster, and the idea of tampering with evidence would sit poorly with him. He shook his head vehemently. No, I can't do that. It's evidence, James. Evidence of something foul. I'll show it to you later, perhaps when we're not so exposed. He glanced again toward the door, and I followed his gaze, half expecting to see a shadow lurking in the hallway. The drawing-room door creaked open then, and Flora Ackroyd entered, her delicate frame almost swallowed by the grandeur of the room. She was Roger's niece, a fair-haired girl of 22 with a quiet grace that contrasted sharply with her uncle's robust energy. Her blue eyes, usually bright with mischief, were clouded with worry as she approached us, Uncle Roger. She said, her voice soft but firm, "Parker says luncheon will be ready soon. Will Dr. Shepherd be joining us?" I smiled at her, grateful for the interruption. "I'd be delighted. Flora, if it's no trouble." "No trouble at all," she replied, though her smile was strained. She turned to Ackroyd, her hands clasped tightly before her. "Uncle, you look dreadful. Is everything all right?" Ackroyd forced a chuckle, though it sounded hollow. "Just business, my dear. Nothing for you to worry about. Why don't you see to our guests? I hear Ralph's arrived." Flora's expression faltered at the mention of her step-brother, Ralph Patten. "He's in the billiard room," she said, her tone clipped. "I'll fetch him." As she left, I couldn't help but note the tension in her posture. Ralph Ackroyd's stepson from his late wife's first marriage was a charming but wayward young man, prone to debts and dalliances that kept the village gossips busy. Caroline had once remarked that Ralph was a handsome devil with a knack for trouble, and I suspected she wasn't far off. His relationship with Ackroyd had been strained of late, though I wasn't privy to the details. "Ralph's been a trial," Ackroyd muttered, as if reading my thoughts. "Always asking for money, always running off, and now, with this business about Mrs. Ferrars." He trailed off, his eyes distant. I leaned forward, sensing an opportunity to probe further. "Is Ralph mixed up in this, with the letter?" "I mean," Ackroyd's jaw tightened. "I don't know. James." "I hope not. But he's been secretive, more so than usual, and Florissy's been acting strange too. Protective of him, almost." The conversation was cut short by the arrival of Parker, the butler, a tall, thin man with a face as expressionless as a mask. "Luncheon is served, sir," he announced, his voice smooth and precise. "Thank you, Parker," Ackroyd said, rising. "Come, James, let's put this aside for now. A good meal might clear my head." We moved to the dining room, a grand space dominated by a long mahogany table and a glittering chandelier. The walls were lined with portraits of Ackroyd's ancestors, their stern gazes seeming to follow us as we took our seats. Flora was already there, joined by Ralph Patten, whose easy smile and tousled dark hair did little to mask the tension in his eyes. Beside him sat Geoffrey Raymond, Ackroyd's private secretary, a pleasant young man with a quick wit and a knack for organization. Mrs. Ackroyd, Roger's sister-in-law, completed the party, her sharp features and sharper tongue. Familiar presence at Ferny Park. "Luncheon looks splendid, as always," I remarked, hoping to lighten the mood. The table was laden with cold meats, fresh bread, and a vibrant salad, all ranged with the precision one expected from Parker's oversight. Mrs. Ackroyd sniffed, adjusting her pince-nez. "It's adequate, I suppose, though I do wish we could have something more modern." All this heavy English fare is so tiresome." Flora laughed, a touch too brightly. "Oh, Aunt, you'd have us eating French cuisine every day if you could." "And why not?" Mrs. Ackroyd retorted. "A little sophistication wouldn't hurt this household." Ralph rolled his eyes, leaning back in his chair. "Let's not start on sophistication, Aunt. You'd have us all in Paris by next week." The banter continued, but I noticed Ackroyd's silence, his gaze fixed on his plate as if it held the answers to his troubles. Ralph, too, seemed distracted, his usual charm subdued. I caught Flora watching him, her expression a mix of concern and something else, fear, perhaps. After luncheon, Ackroyd invited me to his study, a cozy room lined with bookshelves and dominated by a heavy oak desk. The letter, he promised, would be revealed. As we entered, I noted the details of the space, the leather armchair by the fireplace, the dictaphone on the desk, a curious modern contraption that Ackroyd used for business correspondence. A window overlooked the garden where I glimpsed a figure Ursula Bourne, the parlour maid, tending to the roses. Her presence was unremarkable, yet something about her quiet efficiency struck me as odd. "Here it is," Ackroyd said, producing a folded sheet of paper from a locked drawer. He handed it to me, his fingers trembling slightly. "Read it, James. But not a word to anyone, understand?" I unfolded the letter, written in Mrs. Farrar's elegant hand. It was brief but chilling, hinting at a secret she had kept for over a year, a secret someone else had discovered and used against her. "I cannot go on," she wrote. "The shame is too great. Roger, you must know the truth, but I beg you, keep it safe." There was no signature, only a hurried scroll that suggested panic. "Good Lord," I murmured, handing it back. "This is serious, Roger. You must go to the police." He shook his head, locking the letter away. "Not yet. I need to think. There's more at stake here than you know, James. Fernley Park. My family, it could all come crashing down." We were interrupted by a knock at the door. Parker entered, his expression as impassive as ever. "Miss Flora requests your presence in the drawing-room, sir," he said. "She seems distressed." Ackroyd sighed, rubbing his temples. "Very well. Thank you, Parker. James, will you join me?" I followed him back to the drawing-room, where Flora stood by the window, her hands clasped tightly. Ralph was nowhere to be seen, and Mrs. Ackroyd was fussing with her embroidery, muttering about the inconvenience of it all. Geoffrey Raymond hovered nearby, his usual composure tinged with unease. "Uncle," Flora said, turning to face us, "I need to speak with you. It's about Ralph. He's gone." "Gone?" Ackroyd's voice was sharp. "What do you mean, gone?" Chapter 3. A dagger in the dark night was heavy with an oppressive stillness, the kind that seemed to smother King's Abbot in a blanket of unease. The air, thick with the scent of late summer roses and the faint tang of impending rain, carried a weight that pressed against Dr. James Shepherd's chest as he walked the familiar path. From Fernley Park, his mind churned, replaying the evening's events, Roger Ackroyd's nervous demeanour, the cryptic references to Mrs. Farrar's death, and that damned letter, its contents still a mystery. Shepherd's footsteps crunched softly on the gravel, each step pulling him further from the grand house and its secrets, yet closer to something he couldn't quite name. He had left Fernley Park not half an hour ago, after a tense dinner where Ackroyd's mood had been a storm cloud over the table. The man had been distracted, his usual bluff charm replaced by a fidgety unease. Shepherd, as both friend and physician, had tried to draw him out, but Ackroyd had deflected, speaking vaguely of troubles and things best left alone. The letter had come up again, Mrs. Farrar's letter, the one Ackroyd had mentioned. In their private conversation earlier that evening, "It's a devil of a thing, Shepherd," he'd said, his voice low, eyes darting to the study door as if expecting an eavesdropper. "She knew something, and now I know it too. But what to do with it, eh? That's the question." Shepherd had pressed, gently at first, then with more insistence, but Ackroyd had clammed up, promising to discuss it later. After dinner, he'd said, "We'll talk then, when the house is quiet," and so Shepherd had left him, promising to return after a quick visit to a patient in the village of Mrs. Gannet, who was forever complaining of ailments that never materialized. It was a flimsy excuse, but Shepherd needed air, needed to clear his head of the nagging sense that something was terribly wrong. Now, as he approached Fernley Park again, the house loomed against the night sky, its windows glowing faintly like eyes watching his return. The clock in the village square had struck 10 as he passed, its chimes a sombre toll that seemed to echo Ackroyd's mood. Shepherd quickened his pace, his doctor's bag swinging at his side, the leather handle, worn smooth from years of use. He told himself it was just a feeling, a trick of the mind after a long day. But the unease grew stronger with every step. He reached the gates of Fernley Park, their ironwork cold under his hand. The gravel drive stretched before him, leading to the front door, which stood slightly ajar, a detail that struck him as odd. Ackroyd's butler, Parker, was meticulous, the sort who'd sooner die than leave a door improperly closed. Shepherd hesitated, his breath catching. The silence was to complete, broken only by the distant hoot of an owl. He pushed the door open, stepping into the hall. "Parker," he called softly, his voice swallowed by the cavernous space. The hall was dimly lit, the chandelier casting long shadows across the polished floor. No answer came. Shepherd's pulse quickened, a faint prickle of sweat forming at his temples. He moved toward the study where Ackroyd had promised to wait. The door was closed, but a sliver of light spilled from beneath it, sharp and golden. Against the dark wood dot he knocked, a sharp rap that echoed in the stillness. "Ackroyd, it's Shepherd." No response. He knocked again, harder this time, his knuckles stinging. "Roger?" Still nothing. His hand found the jewel knob, cold and unyielding. He turned it, expecting resistance, but the door swung inward. With a faint creak, the study was as he'd left it, or nearly so. The fire still crackled in the grate, casting a warm glow over the heavy oak furniture. Ackroyd's desk, cluttered with papers and a silver inkstand, stood against one wall. The armchairs, their leather worn to a soft sheen, flanked the fireplace. But something was wrong, terribly wrong. Roger Ackroyd sat in his high-backed chair, facing away from the door, his head slumped forward. The room smelled faintly of something metallic, a scent Shepherd knew too well from his years as a doctor. Blood. His heart lurched as he crossed the room in 3 quick strides, his bag dropping to the floor with a thud. Ackroyd. He reached for the man's shoulder, turning him gently. Ackroyd's body sagged, lifeless, his eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. A dagger, its handle ornate and gleaming, protruded from his neck just below the jaw. Blood had soaked his collar, pooling on the desk and dripping onto the carpet in a slow, relentless rhythm. Shepherd staggered back, his breath coming in short gasps. His mind raced, cataloguing details even as panic clawed at him. The dagger's angle, the lack of struggle, the locked window behind the desk. Locked, the word snagged in his thoughts. He crossed to the window, checking the latch. It was secure, the heavy curtains undisturbed. The door he turned, realizing he hadn't checked it. He strode back, testing the knob. Locked from the inside, the key still in place. His mind reeled. A locked room, a dead man. No way in or out. He forced himself to move, to think. He needed help. Parker. Where was that damned butler? He stumbled into the hall, shouting now. Parker. Anyone. Footsteps came at last, hurried and uneven. Parker appeared, his usually impeccable demeanor frayed, his face pale. "Dr. Shepherd? What's—" He stopped, catching sight of Shepherd's expression. "Sir." In the study, Shepherd said, his voice hoarse, "It's Ackroyd. He's dead." Parker's eyes widened, but he moved quickly, following Shepherd back to the study. He froze in the doorway, a sharp intake of breath his only reaction. "Good God," he whispered, then, louder, "I'll fetch the others." The next hour was a blur. The household awoke, a cacophony of shock and grief. Flora Ackroyd, Roger's niece, collapsed in tears when she saw her uncle's body, her golden hair falling across her face as she sobbed. Major Blunt, Ackroyd's old friend, stood rigid, his jaw tight, saying nothing. Geoffrey Raymond. The secretary tried to take charge, his voice shaking as he suggested calling the police. Mrs. Ackroyd, Roger's sister-in-law, wailed loudly, her histrionics grating on Shepherd's nerves, and Ursula Bourne, the parlour maid, lingered at the edges, her face unreadable, her eyes darting to the dagger. The police arrived swiftly, led by Inspector Davis, a dour man with a moustache that seemed to droop under the weight of his responsibilities. He took one look at the scene and began barking orders, his men fanning out to secure the room. Shepherd recounted his evening dinner, the walk to the village, his return omitting only the nagging sense of dread that had dogged him. Davis listened, his eyes narrowing as he scribbled notes. "And you say the door was locked?" Davis asked. His tone clipped. "Yes," Shepherd said. "Key was in the lock, on the inside. Windows locked too." Davis grunted, moving to examine the dagger. "Nasty business. Looks personal. Any enemies, this Ackroyd?" Shepherd hesitated. "He was wealthy. That's enough to make enemies, I suppose." Davis shot him a look, as if weighing his words. "And this Ralph Patternware's he? Ralph." The name hit Shepherd like a blow. Ackroyd's stepson, young and reckless, had been at dinner but left early, muttering something about needing air. No one had seen him since. Shepherd's stomach twisted. Ralph, with his debts and his temper, would be the obvious suspect. Too obvious, perhaps. "I don't know," Shepherd admitted. "He wasn't here when I returned." Davis's mustache twitched. "Convenient. We'll need to find him fast." The investigation began in earnest, the house buzzing with activity. Policemen tramped through the halls, their boots leaving muddy prints on the carpets. Flora, recovering slightly, hovered near Shepherd, her eyes red but determined. "Dr. Shepherd," she said, her voice low, "we can't let this stand. Uncle Roger deserves justice." Shepherd nodded, his throat tight. "We'll find who did this, Flora." She hesitated, then leaned closer. "There's someone who might help. That funny little man in the village, the one who grows marrows. They say he used to be a detective." Shepherd frowned, picturing the odd foreigner who'd moved to King's Abbot a year ago. "You mean Poirot, the Belgian?" "Yes," Flora said, a spark of hope in her voice. "Hercule Poirot. I've heard stories he solved cases the police couldn't. Please, will you ask him?" Shepherd wanted to protest. The idea of involving a retired eccentric, a man he'd dismissed as a quirky gardener, seemed absurd. But Flora's pleading eyes stopped him. And besides, there was something about Poirot, those sharp, knowing glances he'd caught at village gatherings that made Shepherd wonder if there was more to the man than marrows. "All right," he said finally. "I'll speak to him tomorrow." Flora gripped his arm. "Thank you." "Oh, thank you?" As she turned away, Shepherd's gaze drifted back to the study, where Davis was now photographing the scene. The dagger gleamed under the flash, its blade a cruel reminder of the night's horror. Ackroyd's face, frozen in death, seemed to watch him, accusing. Shepherd shook himself, trying to dispel the image. He was a doctor, not a detective. But as he left Fernley Park, the weight of Flora's request settled on him, heavy as the night. Itself. The next morning, King's Abbot was alive with whispers. News of Ackroyd's murder had spread like wildfire, and by the time Shepherd reached the high street, every shopkeeper and passerby had a theory. "It's that Pattern boy," Mrs. Gannett declared, her voice carrying over the clatter of teacups. In the village tea shop always was trouble, that one. Others pointed to strangers, to jealous rivals, to ghosts of Ackroyd's past. Shepherd ignored them, his mind on Poirot. Chapter 4. The retired detective in the quiet village of King's Abbot, where the days passed with the gentle rhythm of rural life. A peculiar figure had taken up residence. Hercule Poirot, a man of small stature but immense presence, had retired to this unassuming corner of England, seeking solace in the cultivation of vegetable marrows. His neat, precise movements as he tended his garden were a stark contrast to the chaotic whispers that had begun to envelop the village following the death of Mrs. Ferrars and the subsequent murder of Roger Ackroyd. The villagers, unaccustomed To such a cosmopolitan figure speculated about his past with Dr. James Shepherd, the village physician and our narrator, initially mistaking him for a retired hairdresser, a notion that would soon be corrected in the most dramatic fashion. The morning after Flora Ackroyd's desperate plea for help, the sun rose over King's Abbot with a deceptive calm. Dr. Shepherd, still reeling from the events at Fernley Park, found himself drawn to Poirot's modest cottage, a quaint structure nestled at the edge of the village. The garden, meticulously arranged with rows of marrows, was a testament to Poirot's orderly mind, and it was here that Shepherd first encountered the man who would unravel the tangled threads of the Ackroyd case. The meeting, as Shepherd would later recount, was both comical and profound, a moment that would shift the course of the investigation. Shepherd approached the low wall separating Poirot's garden from the lane, his steps hesitant. He had heard of Poirot's reputation vaguely through Caroline's gossip, but the sight of a small, dapper man in a striped waistcoat fussing over his vegetables did little to inspire confidence. "Good morning," Shepherd called, his voice betraying a mix of curiosity and skepticism. "You must be the new resident. I'm Dr. Shepherd, from the village." Poirot looked up, his green eyes sharp and assessing, though his face broke into a polite smile. "Bonjour, Monsieur le Docteur," he replied, his accent unmistakably foreign. "I am Hercule Poirot, and these," he gestured to the marrows, "are my pride and joy. But I sense you have not come to discuss the art of gardening." Shepherd chuckled, though the sound was strained. "No, not quite. It's about Roger Ackroyd. He's been murdered, and his niece, Flora, mentioned you. Might help, though, to be honest, I thought you were a hairdresser." Poirot's mustache twitched, a flicker of amusement crossing his features. "A hairdresser. Won't do. What a charming misconception. No, no. I am a detective, or rather, I was. I have retired to enjoy the simple pleasures of life. But murder, it seems, follows me even here." The conversation that followed was a delicate dance of persuasion and curiosity. Shepherd, still grappling with the shock of Ackroyd's death, explained the situation, the locked study, the missing stepson, Ralph Patten, and the village's growing unease. Poirot listened intently, his head tilted slightly, his fingers steepled, as if already piecing together a puzzle only he could see. "A locked room, you say?" He mused. "And a dagger. Most intriguing. Tell me, Doctor, what do you make of this Ralph Patten?" Shepherd hesitated, his mind racing. "He's a good lad, but troubled. He's in debt, and there's talk of a secret engagement. The police think he's involved. But I can't believe he'd do it." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Belief is a dangerous thing, Doctor. It clouds the truth. But come, let us not stand here among the marrows. I will visit Fernley Park and see this tragedy for myself." Thus began an unlikely partnership, one that would test Shepherd's assumptions and reveal the depths of Poirot's genius. The walk to Fernley Park was a short one, but it gave Shepherd time to observe his new companion. Poirot's fastidiousness was evident in every step. His polished shoes gleamed, his tie was perfectly knotted, and his moustache was a work of art. Yet there was something in his demeanor, a quiet intensity, that suggested he was far more than a retired eccentric dot at Fernley Park. The air was thick with grief and suspicion. Flora Ackroyd greeted them at the door, her face pale but composed. "Monsieur Poirot, thank you for coming," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I know you're retired, but we're desperate. Ralph is missing, and the police are saying terrible things." Poirot bowed slightly, his manner reassuring. "Mademoiselle, I am here to seek the truth, nothing more. Tell me everything and leave nothing out." The household was assembled in the drawing-room, a somber gathering of suspects and mourners. There was Parker, the butler, whose rigid posture betrayed nothing, Geoffrey Raymond, Ackroyd's young secretary, whose easy charm seemed strained, Mrs. Ackroyd, Roger's sister-in-law, whose sharp tongue masked her anxiety, and Major Blunt, a family friend, whose gruff demeanor hid a keen interest in Flora. Shepherd watched as Poirot moved among them, his questions gentle but probing, his eyes missing nothing. Tell me, Monsieur Parker, Poirot began, addressing the butler. What did you hear on the night of the murder? Parker's face remained impassive. I was in the pantry, sir, preparing the evening tray. I heard nothing unusual until Miss Flora screamed. And you, Monsieur Raymond? Poirot turned to the secretary, who shifted uncomfortably. I was in my room, working on some accounts for Mr. Ackroyd. I didn't hear anything until the commotion started. Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. And the study, it was locked when the body was found. Yes, Flora interjected. I tried the door myself. It was locked from the inside. A curious detail, Poirot murmured, his fingers, brushing his moustache, and yet a locked room is not so impenetrable as it seems. Shepherd, standing to the side, felt a growing unease. Poirot's questions were innocuous enough, but there was a purpose behind them, a method that Shepherd could not yet discern. He found himself drawn into the investigation, not merely as a witness, but as Poirot's reluctant assistant. What do you think, Poirot? He asked as they stepped outside to examine the grounds. Is it possible Ralph did it? Poirot paused, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Possible? Everything is possible, Doctor. But possibility is not proof. We must look at the facts, the little details that others overlook. The moved chair, the footprints. The timing, these are the threads that will lead us to the truth. The day wore on, with Poirot and Shepherd retracing the events of the murder night. They examined the study, a large room lined with books and heavy furniture. The desk, where Ackroyd's body had been found, was still stained with blood, though. The dagger had been taken by the police. Poirot's attention, however, was drawn to a chair that had been moved slightly out of place, its position at odds with the room's otherwise meticulous order. This chair, Poirot said, circling. It slowly, it tells a story. Why was it moved? To conceal something? To create a false impression? We shall see. Shepherd watched, fascinated and frustrated. Poirot's methods were unlike anything he had encountered. The detective seemed to linger on trivialities, the angle of a chair, the placement of a rug, while the village buzzed with theories about Ralph's guilt. Yet there was a confidence in Poirot's demeanour, a certainty that the truth was within reach. As evening fell, Poirot and Shepherd returned to the village, their conversation turning to the broader context of the case. Tell me, Doctor, Poirot said, what do you know of Mrs. Farrar's death? It seems to me that it is connected to this tragedy. Shepherd frowned, his mind racing. She died suddenly, a week ago. The village said it was suicide, possibly. Poison? There were rumours she'd poisoned her husband a year earlier, but nothing was proven. Rumours, Poirot repeated, his tone thoughtful. They are like the wind, carrying truth and lies in equal measure. But there is something in this, I think. A letter, perhaps. Ackroyd mentioned a letter to you. Did he not? Shepherd nodded, his throat tightening. Yes. He said Mrs. Farrar's wrote to him before she died. He was going to read it that night, but he never got the chance. Poirot's eyes gleamed. A letter that never reached its destination. Another thread, Doctor. We shall follow it. Over the next few days, Poirot's investigation took on a rhythm of its own. He interviewed the household staff, probed the villagers for gossip, and returned repeatedly to the crime scene, each visit yielding new observations. Shepherd, caught between his role as narrator and participant, found himself increasingly drawn into Poirot's world. The detective's questions were relentless, his logic unassailable, yet there was a warmth to him, a humanity that belied his reputation as a cold, calculating mind. One afternoon, as they sat in Poirot's cottage, sipping tea and surrounded by the scent of marrows, Poirot shared a glimpse of his philosophy. You see, Doctor, the truth is not found in the grand gestures, but in the small things, the glance, the hesitation, the misplaced object. The human mind is a puzzle, and I, Hercule Poirot, am its solver. Shepherd, despite his initial skepticism, began to see the brilliance in Poirot's approach. The detective's focus on details, the chair, the footprints. The timing of the murder revealed a mind that saw patterns where others saw chaos. Yet there was something unsettling about Poirot's scrutiny, a sense that he was watching Shepherd as closely as he watched the suspects. As the investigation deepened, Poirot began to uncover connections between the characters that Shepherd had overlooked. Ursula Bourne, the parlour-maid, seemed nervous under questioning, her answers vague. Caroline Shepherd, ever the gossip, hinted at a scandal involving Ralph and an unknown woman. And Flora, despite her grief, seemed to be hiding something about her uncle's final hours. One evening, as they walked back from Fernley Park, Poirot stopped suddenly, his eyes fixed on a patch of ground near the study window. "Look here, Doctor," he said, pointing to a faint mark in the soil. "What do you see?" Shepherd squinted. "A footprint, maybe, but it's too faint to tell." "Too faint, perhaps, but not invisible," Poirot replied. "It is the mark of someone who did not wish to be seen. We must consider all possibilities, even those that seem impossible." The days turned into a week, and Poirot's presence in King's Abbot became a source of both fascination and unease. The villagers, accustomed to their quiet routines, whispered about the foreign detective who asked too many questions. Shepherd, meanwhile, found himself caught in a strange duality, part observer, part accomplice. Poirot's reliance on him was flattering, but it also carried a weight, as if the detective saw something in Shepherd that he himself did not. One morning, Poirot summoned Shepherd to the cottage with a new urgency. "Doctor, I have been thinking," he said, his voice low. "This case, it is not just about a murder. It is about a secret that binds these people together. Mrs. Ferrars, Ackroyd. The letter, they are all pieces of the same puzzle." Shepherd felt a chill. "What kind of secret?" Poirot smiled, but it was a smile without warmth. "That, my friend, is what we must discover. But I warn you, the truth is often a dangerous thing. It reveals not only the crime but the heart of those involved." As they continued their investigation, Poirot's focus shifted to the relationships within the Ackroyd household. He questioned Flora about her engagement to Ralph, probed Major Blunt about his feelings for her, and pressed Parker on the events of the murder night. Each conversation added a layer to the mystery, but it also deepened Shepherd's unease. Poirot's questions seemed to circle closer to him, as if the detective suspected something he was not yet ready to share. One afternoon, as they stood in the study once more, Poirot paused by the desk, his fingers tracing the edge. "This room," he said. "It holds the key. The chair, the dagger, the locked door, they are all part of a performance, a carefully staged act. But who is the director, Doctor? That is the question." Shepherd's heart pounded, though he forced a smile. "You're starting to sound like my sister, Caroline, with her wild theories." Poirot's eyes met his, sharp and unyielding. "Your sister, she sees much, but she does not understand. I, on the other hand, see and understand. And soon, Doctor, you will understand too." Chapter 5, Footprints and Alibist morning after Roger Ackroyd's murder broke over King's Abbot like a storm cloud, heavy and unyielding. The village, usually alive with the mundane chatter of daily life, was now cloaked in a tense hush, as if the very air held its breath. Dr. James Shepherd, ever the observer, stood at the window of his surgery, watching the mist curl over the cobblestone streets. His hands, steady enough to wield a scalpel, trembled slightly as he clutched a cup of tea, now cold. The events of the previous night, the locked study, the dagger, the blood played in his mind like a relentless phonograph record, each detail sharp and unescapable. Hercule Poirot, the peculiar little Belgian who had traded his detective's badge for a vegetable patch, arrived at Shepherd's door precisely at 9. His moustache, impeccably waxed, twitched as he surveyed the doctor with those piercing green eyes. "Mon ami," Poirot said, his voice a blend of warmth and steel. "We must visit Fernley Park. The truth, it hides in the details, and the details, they wait for us." Shepherd nodded, though his stomach churned. He had agreed to assist Poirot, partly out of curiosity, partly because the village expected it of their trusted physician. But there was something else, a nagging sense that he was being drawn into a game he didn't fully understand. As they walked to Fernley Park, the crunch of gravel underfoot seemed to echo the grinding uncertainty in Shepherd's mind. The great house loomed ahead, its ivy-clad walls sombre under the grey sky. Inspector Davis, a stout man with a perpetually furrowed brow, met them at the entrance. Dr. Shepherd, Mr. Poirot, he greeted, his tone clipped. "We've secured the study. The coroner's been notified, and we're waiting on the inquest. But I'll be frank, Ralph Patton's disappearance doesn't look good." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "The disappearance, it is but one piece of the puzzle, Inspector. Let us see the room where Monsieur Ackroyd met his end. The study was as they had left it the night before, save for the constables guarding the door, the heavy oak desk, the leather chair. The shelves lined with books all stood in silent witness to the crime. Ackroyd's body had been removed, but the blood stain on the carpet remained, a dark accusation." Poirot moved with the precision of a watchmaker, his small frame darting from one corner to another. He paused at the window where muddy footprints marred the sill. "These," Poirot said, crouching, "are most interesting. They match the boots of Monsieur Ralph Patton." Inspector Davis nodded. "We found a pair of his boots in the hall, caked with mud, the patterns identical. He was here, no question." Shepherd felt a pang of unease. Ralph, the charming but reckless stepson, had always been a favourite in the village. His sudden absence, coupled with the footprints, painted a damning picture. Yet something about it felt too neat, too convenient. Poirot stood, brushing his hands. "And a chair, Inspector. You noticed it was moved?" Davis frowned. "Moved. It's where it always was, by the desk." Non, Poirot said, wagging a finger. "It is not where it was. Observe the indentations in the carpet. The chair, it has been shifted slightly, but enough. Someone wished to alter the scene, perhaps to mislead." Shepherd's pulse quickened. He hadn't noticed the chair, but now that Poirot pointed it out, the faint marks in the carpet were unmistakable. How had he missed it? His role as narrator, he realized, was not just to recount, but to observe, and he was already failing. The investigation moved to the household. Poirot insisted on questioning everyone present on the night of the murder, and Inspector Davis, though sceptical of the retired detective's methods, agreed. They gathered in the drawing-room, where the air was thick with tension. Flora Ackroyd, pale but composed, sat by the fireplace, her hands clasped tightly. Parker, the butler, stood rigid, his face a mask of professionalism. Geoffrey Raymond, Ackroyd's young secretary, leaned against the mantel, his usual easy smile replaced by a grim line. Mrs. Ackroyd, Roger's sister-in-law, fanned herself nervously, while Major Blunt, a family friend, stared out the window as if wishing to escape. Poirot began with Parker. "You, Monsieur Parker, you were the last to see Monsieur Ackroyd alive." "Oui." Parker's jaw tightened. "I brought him his evening brandy at 9. He was in the study writing letters. I left him and went to the servants' hall. I didn't return until Dr. Shepherd raised the alarm. And you heard nothing, no cries, no struggle." Poirot's voice was gentle, but his eyes were sharp. "Nothing, sir," Parker said. "The study's walls are thick, and I was downstairs." Poirot nodded, turning to Geoffrey Raymond. "And you, Monsieur Raymond, where were you at 9:30? Raymond hesitated, then shrugged. "In my room, going over accounts. Mr. Ackroyd had asked me to review some investments. I didn't leave until I heard the commotion." Flora spoke up, her voice trembling. "I was in my room too. I didn't see Uncle Roger after dinner. I swear it." Mrs. Ackroyd's fan fluttered faster. "I was in the parlour reading. I didn't hear anything either. This is all so dreadful." Major Blunt cleared his throat. "I was in the billiard room, practicing shots, alone." Poirot's gaze swept over them, lingering on each face. Shepherd, standing by the door, felt a prickle of discomfort. The alibis were too perfect, too rehearsed. Yet Ralph's absence and the footprints made him the obvious suspect. Was it really so simple? The questioning continued, with Poirot probing, gently but relentlessly. He asked about the timeline. Ackroyd had been seen alive at 9, and Shepherd had discovered the body at 10. The window of opportunity was narrow, barely an hour. The footprints suggested Ralph had climbed through. The window, but why? And how had the door remained locked from the inside? Shepherd's mind raced as he listened. He jotted mental notes, trying to keep up with Poirot's rapid deductions. The detective's questions seemed random about the weather, the staffs, routines, even the brand of polish used on the study's furniture, but Shepherd sensed a method behind it. Poirot was building a picture, piece by piece, and Shepherd was both fascinated and unnerved. As the morning wore on, Poirot requested a private word with Shepherd. They stepped into the garden, where the air was damp with mist. "Doctor," Poirot said, his voice low, "you are my eyes and ears in this village. What do you make of these alibis?" Shepherd hesitated. "They're consistent. Too consistent, perhaps. But Ralph's footprints and his disappearance, they point to him." Poirot smiled faintly. "The footprints, they are convenient. None. A man flees, leaving his boots behind to incriminate him. Yet the chair troubles me. Why move it? And why does no one admit to hearing the dagger strike?" Shepherd frowned. "You think someone's lying, or not saying all they know?" Poirot said. "The truth, it is like a vegetable marrow hidden beneath the leaves, waiting to be uncovered." They returned to the house where Inspector Davis was organizing a search for Ralph. The village was abuzz with rumors, fueled by Caroline Shepherd's tireless gossip. She had already declared Ralph guilty to anyone who would listen, and Shepherd felt a pang of guilt for not reining her in. But Caroline was a force of nature, and her chatter, while exasperating, often carried kernels of truth. Poirot spent the afternoon examining the grounds. He studied the footprints again, noting their depth and angle. "These were made by a man in haste," he said, "but not in flight. The pressure is even, deliberate." "Curious, none?" Shepherd nodded, though he didn't fully grasp Poirot's meaning. The detective's mind worked in ways he couldn't predict, seeing patterns where others saw chaos. They moved to the study window, where Poirot inspected the latch. It was old but functional, easily opened from the outside. Yet the lock on the door, a sturdy Yale, showed no signs of tampering. By evening, the household was fraying. Flora, distraught over Ralph's absence, confided in Shepherd that they had argued the day before the murder. He was upset about money, she said, her eyes red. Uncle Roger was going to cut him off, but Ralph would never kill him, never. Shepherd patted her hand, but his thoughts were elsewhere. Flora's words confirmed a motive for Ralph. Yet Poirot's focus on the chair and the alibis suggested the detective wasn't convinced. As night fell, Shepherd returned home, his mind a tangle of clues and contradictions. The next day brought no sign of Ralph, but Poirot was undeterred. He interviewed the staff again, this time focusing on Ursula Bourne, the parlour maid. She was a quiet woman, her demeanour reserved, but Poirot's questions unsettled her. "You were in the hall at 9, Mademoiselle Bourne?" he asked. "Yes, sir," she replied, her voice barely audible. "I was polishing the silver." "And you saw no one enter or leave the study?" "No, sir." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Yet you were there, so close to the crime. Tell me, what did you hear?" Ursula hesitated, her fingers twisting in her apron. "Nothing, sir. It was quiet." Shepherd watched her closely. Her discomfort was palpable. But was it guilt or fear? Poirot let the matter drop, but Shepherd knew he hadn't forgotten it. The detective's mind was like a trap, closing slowly but surely as the days passed. Poirot and Shepherd fell into a rhythm. They visited Fernley Park daily, piecing together the timeline. The footprints remained the strongest evidence against Ralph, but Poirot's interest in the chair persisted. He measured its position repeatedly, muttering about angles and perspectives. Shepherd, meanwhile, struggled to keep up, his narration growing strained as he tried to make sense of the clues. The village, too, was restless. Caroline's gossip had spread, and now every villager had a theory. Some pointed to Ralph, others to a mysterious stranger seen near Fernley Park. Shepherd listened, sifting through the rumors for truth. He began to see the case as Poirot did, a puzzle with missing pieces, each alibi a potential lie. One evening, Poirot invited Shepherd to his cottage for tea. The little house was immaculate, with rows of vegetables thriving in the garden. Over Steaming cups, Poirot shared his thoughts. This case, Doctor, it is not about one clue but many. The footprints, the chair, the alibis, they are threads in a tapestry. Pull one and the picture changes. Shepherd nodded, though he felt out of his depth. Do you suspect someone specific? Poirot's smile was enigmatic. I suspect everyone, until I suspect no one. But tell me, Doctor, what do you see when you look at this case? Shepherd hesitated. I see a murder, carefully planned. The locked door. The footprints, it's like someone wanted us to think it was Ralph. Precisement, Poirot said. And that, mon ami, is why we must look beyond what we are meant to see. The investigation stretched on, with Poirot's questions growing sharper. He revisited the alibis, cross-referencing times and movements. Parker's story held, but Shepherd noticed a flicker of unease in the butler's eyes. Raymond's accounts were meticulous, yet Poirot lingered over a discrepancy in the secretary's timeline. Flora's grief seemed genuine, but her lies about. Seeing Ackroyd alive raised questions. One afternoon, Poirot made a startling discovery. Hidden behind a bookcase was a small scratch on the wall, barely visible. This, he said, is not an accident. Someone struck the wall, perhaps in haste. Shepherd frowned. The murderer? Perhaps, Poirot said, or perhaps someone who saw more than they admit. The scratch became another piece of the puzzle, joining the footprints, the chair, and the alibis. Shepherd's narration grew more fragmented as he struggled to reconcile the clues. He began to question his own observations, wondering if he had missed something vital. By the end of the week, the case had consumed King's Abbot. The inquest was scheduled, and Ralph remained missing. Poirot, however, seemed calm, almost cheerful. The truth, Doctor, he said one evening, is close. We need only one more piece to see the whole. Shepherd wanted to believe him, but the weight of the mystery pressed down. The footprints pointed to Ralph, yet the chair and the scratch suggested another hand at work. The alibis, so solid at first, now seemed fragile under Poirot's scrutiny. And through it all, Shepherd felt the eyes of the village on him, expecting answers he didn't have. As they stood in the study one final time, Poirot ran his finger along the desk. This room, he said, it holds the secret, not in the blood, not in the dagger, but in the small things, the chair, the scratch, the silence of those who should have heard. Shepherd shivered, though the room was warm. He was no longer just a narrator, he was part of the story, caught in Poirot's web. And as the detective's eyes met his, Shepherd felt a chilling certainty. Poirot was watching him, too. The chapter closed with the mystery unresolved, the alibis hanging like a fog over Fernley Park. Shepherd returned home, his pen heavy as he wrote, knowing that each word brought him closer to a truth he wasn't sure he wanted to face. Chapter 6. The parlour-maid's secrete morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of King's Abbot, casting delicate patterns across the polished floors of Fernley Park. The house, still reeling from Roger Ackroyd's brutal murder, seemed to hold its breath, as if the walls themselves were wary of revealing their secrets. Dr. James Shepherd, our narrator, sat at his desk, pen in hand, scribbling notes for what he claimed was a mere chronicle of events. But the weight of his words felt heavier today, as if each sentence carried an unspoken burden. The village buzzed with speculation, and at the heart of it all was Hercule Poirot, the peculiar little Belgian who had turned their quiet lives upside down. Shepherd, with his characteristic blend of detachment and curiosity, began the day by accompanying Poirot to Fernley Park. The air was thick with the scent of late summer roses, but the beauty of the estate was overshadowed by the grim task at hand. Poirot, dressed impeccably in a dark suit despite the warmth, walked with a purposeful stride, his eyes darting about as if reading the very ground for clues. Mon ami, he said to Shepherd, his moustache twitching, today we shall uncover something vital. The truth, it hides in the smallest of details. Nest's pause. Their destination was the servants' quarters, where Poirot intended to question Ursula Bourne, the parlour-maid whose lack of an alibi had raised eyebrows. Shepherd, ever the observer, noted the tension in the household staff. The butler, Parker, hovered near the door, his face a mask of professional neutrality, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. The housemaid, Elsie, scurried past with her tray, her hands trembling slightly. The atmosphere was one of suppressed panic, as if each servant feared they might be next under Poirot's magnifying glass. Ursula Bourne awaited them in the small sitting room used by the staff. She was a striking woman, tall and composed, with dark hair pulled tightly into a bun and eyes that seemed to see more than they revealed. Her uniform was crisp, her demeanour calm, but Shepherd sensed a guardedness in her posture, as if she were bracing for an attack. Poirot, with his usual flair, greeted her warmly, his voice smooth as velvet. "Mademoiselle Bourne, I am Hercule Poirot, and this is my associate, Dr. Shepherd. We wish only to understand the events of that tragic night. You will help us, yes?" Ursula nodded. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "I'll do what I can, sir," she said, her voice low but steady. Shepherd, standing by the window, watched her closely, noting the slight tightening of her fingers around the edge of her apron. There was something about her that didn't quite fit the role of a humble parlour maid. Poirot began with gentle questions, easing her into the conversation. "You were in the house the night Mr. Ackroyd was murdered, were you not? Tell me, what did you do after dinner?" Ursula recounted her duties, clearing the dining room, polishing silver, ensuring the drawing room was tidy for the family. She claimed to have been in the servants' hall by 9:30 p.m. alone, as the others had either retired or were occupied elsewhere. "And you saw nothing unusual?" Poirot pressed, his green eyes glinting. "No one entering or leaving the study?" "No, sir," Ursula replied, her gaze steady. "I was in the back of the house. The study is too far to hear or see anything." Shepherd scribbled in his notebook, his pen pausing as he considered her words. Her alibi was flimsy, no one to corroborate her whereabouts, no specific tasks to anchor her timeline. Yet her composure was unnerving, as if she had rehearsed her answers. Poirot shifted tactics, leaning forward slightly. "Mademoiselle, you are new to Fernley Park, are you not? How long have you Hussein employed you?" Ursula's cheeks flushed faintly. 6 months, sir." Poirot nodded, as if this were merely interesting trivia. "And before that, you have the air of someone educated." "Perhaps." The question caught her off guard, and for a moment her calm faltered. "I worked in London, sir, as a governess." Shepherd raised an eyebrow, surprised. A governess turned parlour-maid? It was an unusual step down in station. Poirot's eyes gleamed with interest. "A governess. Most intriguing. And what brought you to King's Abbot?" Ursula hesitated, her fingers twisting the fabric of her apron. "I needed a change. London was too much." Her voice was clipped, as if closing the door on further inquiry. Poirot did not press, but Shepherd could sense the detective filing the information away for later. As they left the sitting room, Shepherd's sister, Caroline, intercepted them in the hallway, her eyes alight with gossip. "James, have you heard? They're saying Ralph Patten was secretly engaged to that parlour-maid." Shepherd groaned inwardly. Caroline's knack for uncovering secrets was both a blessing and a curse. Poirot, however, perked up. "Engaged, you say, to Mademoiselle Bourne?" Caroline nodded vigorously. "Oh, yes, the village is buzzing about it. Apparently, Ralph was quite smitten, but Mr. Ackroyd didn't approve." Shepherd felt a jolt of surprise. Ralph Patten, the dashing stepson, engaged to a parlour-maid? It seemed improbable, yet Caroline's sources were rarely wrong. Poirot's moustache twitched again, a sure sign his mind was racing. "This is most illuminating. Madame Caroline, a secret engagement. It changes the picture, does it not?" Shepherd, ever the skeptic, muttered, "If it's true." But the seed of doubt had been planted. Back at Poirot's modest cottage, the detective paced the small parlour, his hands clasped behind his back. "This Ursula Bourne, she is no ordinary parlour-maid," he declared. "Her manner, her speech, she has the education of a lady, yet she serves tea and polishes silver. Why?" Shepherd shrugged, feeling out of his depth. "Perhaps she fell on hard times." Poirot stopped pacing and fixed him with a piercing stare. Or perhaps she hides something, mon ami. A woman like that does not become a parlour-maid without reason. The conversation turned to Ralph Patten. If the engagement rumour was true, it cast new light on his disappearance. A man in love, Poirot mused, might do desperate things to protect his beloved, or to escape a scandal. Shepherd frowned, his pen tapping against his notebook. You think Ursula's involved in the murder? Poirot's smile was enigmatic. I think nothing yet, but I observe and I listen. The investigation continued with a visit to the village inn, where Caroline's gossip network had pinpointed a witness, a barmaid who claimed to have seen Ursula and Ralph together in secret. The barmaid, a plump woman named Molly, was eager to talk, especially with Poirot's charm at work. They were cosy, all right, she said, wiping a glass with a rag. Met in the lane behind the church late at night. Thought no one saw him, but I did. Shepherd scribbled furiously, his mind racing. A secret romance could explain many things: motive, opportunity, even Ralph's sudden vanishing act. Poirot, however, was not satisfied. This love affair, he said as they walked back to Fernley Park. It is too convenient, perhaps a distraction. Shepherd glanced at him, puzzled. You think it's a lie? Poirot shook his head. Not a lie, but a piece of the puzzle. We must find where it fits. The afternoon brought them back to Ursula Bourne. This time, Poirot was more direct. Mademoiselle, there is talk of an engagement to Monsieur Ralph Patten. Is this true? Ursula's face paled, but she held her ground. That's my business, sir. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And if it concerns the murder of your employer, is it still your business? For the first time, Ursula's composure cracked. I didn't kill Mr. Ackroyd, she said, her voice trembling. I loved Ralph, but I had nothing to do with it. Shepherd watched the exchange, his pen still, his mind churning. Ursula's denial was passionate, but was it genuine? The absence of an alibi, her mysterious past. The secret engagement all pointed to a woman with secrets. Yet Poirot seemed oddly satisfied, as if her reaction confirmed something he suspected. As the day drew to a close, Poirot and Shepherd sat in the garden, the air cooling with the approach of evening. Poirot sipped a tisane, his eyes distant. This case, mon ami, is like a tangled ball of yarn. Each thread we pull reveals another knot. Shepherd nodded, though he felt more lost than ever. Ursula's hiding something, he said. But what? Poirot's smile was maddeningly cryptic. That, my friend, is the secret of the parlour-maid, and we shall unravel it. The investigation pressed on, with Poirot's questions growing sharper, his observations keener. Shepherd, caught between his role as narrator and reluctant detective, found himself questioning his own perceptions. Was Ursula a victim of circumstance, or a cunning player in a deadly game? The village of King's Abbot held its breath, waiting for the truth to emerge from the shadows. Chapter 7. The dictaphone deception. The morning sun filtered through the heavy drapes of Fernley Park, casting long, wavering shadows across the polished floors of Roger Ackroyd's study. The air was thick with the scent of old leather and wax, a room frozen in time since the night of the murder. I, Dr. James Shepherd, stood by the window, my hands clasped behind my back, watching the world outside as it stirred into its usual rhythm. The village of King's Abbot, however, was anything but usual now. The murder had cracked its placid surface, and beneath it, secrets churned like a restless tide. Hercule Poirot, that peculiar little man with his egg-shaped head and fastidious moustache, was already at work. He moved about the study with a quiet intensity, his eyes darting from one object to another as if each held a fragment of the truth. I had grown accustomed to his oddities, his penchant for straightening picture frames, his insistence on referring to his little grey cells as if they were a separate entity altogether. Yet there was something unnerving about his presence today, a sharpness in his gaze that made me feel as though he were peeling back the layers of my very thoughts. Mon ami, Poirot said, breaking the silence, you are pensive this morning. Is it the weight of the tragedy, or something else that troubles you? I turned from the window, forcing a smile. just the shock of it all. Poirot, a man like Ackroyd stabbed in his own home. It's enough to unsettle anyone. He nodded, but his green eyes lingered on me a moment too long. Oui, it is a shock. But shocks, they reveal much. They shake loose the truths that hide in the corners of men's minds. I said nothing, merely nodding as I moved to the desk where Ackroyd's body had been found. The chair, slightly askew, still bore the faint imprint of his weight. The police had come and gone, their heavy boots trampling through the room. But Poirot had insisted on returning. He had a way of seeing what others missed, and I both admired and dreaded it. Now, let us consider, Poirot said, pacing slowly. The study, it is locked from the inside. The dagger, it is found in Monsieur Ackroyd's neck. The footprints, they lead to the window, but the window, it is closed and latched, a puzzle. Nest's paws, a puzzle indeed, I agreed, my voice steady despite the tightness in my chest. The police seem convinced it's Ralph Patten. Those footprints match his shoes, after all. Poirot's moustache twitched. The footprints, yes. Convenient, are they not? Too convenient, perhaps. He knelt by the desk, his fingers brushing the edge of a drawer. And yet, there is something here that does not fit. Something out of place. I watched him, my heart beating a little faster. What do you mean? He did not answer immediately. Instead, he opened the drawer and began sifting through its contents, papers, pens, a small notebook. Then, with a sudden exclamation, he pulled out a small, metallic object, no larger than a cigarette case. It gleamed faintly in the light, its surface etched with a pattern of tiny perforations. Quest, excusez? He murmured, turning it over in his hands. A dictaphone, doctor. A most curious device to find in a man's study. A dictaphone, I echoed, stepping closer. Ackroyd was old-fashioned. I can't imagine him using such a thing. Precisement, Poirot said, his voice low. And yet, here it is. Tell me, doctor, did you ever hear Monsieur Ackroyd use this device? To dictate letters, perhaps? Or to record his thoughts? I shook my head, genuinely puzzled. Never. He preferred pen and paper. Said it kept his thoughts clear. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Then why? I wonder, is it here, and why? I ask myself, does it feel warm to the touch, as if it has been used recently? A chill ran through me, though I kept my expression neutral. Perhaps one of the staff used it. Parker, maybe, or Raymond. Perhaps, Poirot said. But his tone suggested he thought otherwise. He set the dictaphone on the desk and pressed a button. A faint whirring sound filled the room, followed by a crackle. Then, to my astonishment, Roger Ackroyd's voice echoed from the device, as clear as if he were standing beside us. And so, my dear shepherd, I must tell you, the letter, it changes everything. The recording cut off abruptly, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. I stared at the dictaphone, my mind racing. Ackroyd's voice, so calm, so alive, seemed to mock the reality of his death. But more than that, it raised a question that gnawed at me. When had this been recorded, and why? Poirot's gaze was fixed on me again, unblinking. Interesting, is it not? A man speaks from beyond the grave. But what does he say, doctor, and when did he say it? I swallowed, my throat dry. It must have been recorded before his death. Perhaps he was dictating a note to me. Perhaps, Poirot said again, but his voice was laced with skepticism. But the warmth of the machine, it suggests recent use, and the words, they are vague, yet heavy with meaning. A letter that changes everything. What letter? I wonder. I forced a laugh, though it sounded hollow even to my own ears. You're making too much of it, Poirot. Ackroyd was always dramatic, probably just some business matter. Poirot did not smile. Instead, he picked up the dictaphone and examined it closely, his fingers tracing the edges. This device, it is a clever thing. It can make a man seem alive when he is not. It can create the illusion of presence. Tell me, doctor, where were you at 9 o'clock on the night of the murder? The question caught me off guard, and for a moment I faltered. 9 o'clock? I was at home. I believe, yes, I'd returned from Fernley Park after dinner. Alone? Poirot asked, his tone deceptively mild. Yes, alone, I said. Meeting his gaze, Caroline can confirm I was home by 9:30. Been, he said, nodding slowly. And yet, the timeline, it is tight. Monsieur Ackroyd was alive at 9, according to the household. By 10, he was dead, and this dictaphone, it suggests a voice heard after his death. A most curious discrepancy. I felt a bead of sweat trickle down my temple, but I wiped it away quickly, hoping he hadn't noticed. You think someone used the dictaphone to make it seem Ackroyd was alive later than he was? Poirot's eyes sparkled with something akin to amusement. You are quick, Doctor. Yes, I think it possible. A voice, recorded and played at the right moment, could deceive a listener outside the door. It could buy time for a murderer to escape. The room seemed to close in around me, the walls pressing tighter with every word. I forced myself to nod, to play the part of the curious assistant. That's ingenious. But who would think of such a thing? Who, indeed? Poirot said, his voice soft but piercing. He set the dictaphone down and began pacing again, his hands clasped behind his back. The murderer, he is clever. He knows the habits of this house. He knows the value of time, of misdirection. But he does not know Hercule Poirot. I managed a weak smile. You're confident, aren't you? Confidence, Doctor, comes from order and method. The little grey cells, they do not fail me. He stopped pacing and turned to face me, his expression unreadable. But tell me, mon ami, why do you narrate this tale with such detachment? A man is dead, a friend, and yet your voice, it is steady, your words measured. I felt my pulse quicken, but I kept my tone light. I'm a doctor, Poirot. I've seen death before. You learn to keep a clear head. Oui, a clear head, he murmured. And yet, the heart, it betrays us all in the end. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of questions and observations. Poirot interrogated the household staff again, his questions sharp and unrelenting. Parker, the butler, swore he'd never seen the dictaphone before. Geoffrey Raymond, Ackroyd's secretary, admitted to knowing about it but claimed it hadn't been used in months. Flora, pale and nervous, fidgeted under Poirot's gaze, her eyes darting to me as if seeking reassurance. I offered her a smile, but my mind was elsewhere, tangled in the web of Poirot's words. By noon, we had returned to the study, and Poirot was examining the chair again, the one that had been moved, its position slightly off from where it should have been. This chair, he said, almost to himself, it is a small thing, but it speaks loudly. Why move a chair after a murder? To stage a scene, perhaps, to suggest a struggle that did not happen. I shrugged, my hands in my pockets. Or maybe it was just knocked out of place in the chaos. Chaos, you say. Poirot's eyes narrowed. But this room, it is orderly. Too orderly, perhaps. The murderer, he is meticulous. He leaves nothing to chance except, perhaps, this chair. I felt a prickle of unease, but I pushed it down. You're reading too much into it, Poirot. Sometimes a chair is just a chair. He chuckled a low, unsettling sound. Oh, Doctor, you are a man of science, but you lack imagination. In a crime such as this, nothing is just what it seems. As the day wore on, Poirot's focus on the dictaphone grew more intense. He sent for a technician from London, a weary man with spectacles, who arrived by the afternoon train and spent hours examining the device. The technician confirmed that the recording was recent, likely made within hours of Ackroyd's death. The implications were chilling. Someone had used the dictaphone to create the illusion that Ackroyd was alive, speaking in his study long after the dagger had found its mark. Whoever did this, the technician said, adjusting his glasses, knew exactly what they were doing. The recording was timed perfectly to match the household's movements. Poirot nodded, his expression grave. Merci, monsieur. You have confirmed what I suspected. This is no ordinary crime. It is a performance, a play with many acts, and we have only begun to peel back the curtain. I stood by, my hands clenched at my sides. as Poirot thanked the technician and sent him on his way. The study felt smaller now, the air heavier with every new revelation. I could feel Poirot's mind working, piecing together the fragments of the puzzle, and I wondered how long it would be before he turned his gaze on me not as an assistant, but as something else entirely. That evening, as we sat in Poirot's modest cottage, he poured me a glass of wine and leaned back in his chair, his eyes half closed. "Tell me, Doctor," he said, his voice soft, "what is it that you fear most in this case?" The question caught me off guard, and for a moment I could only stare at him. "Fear? I don't know what you mean. I'm not afraid." He smiled, a small, knowing smile. "Everyone fears something, mon ami. For some, it is the truth. For others, it is the shadow of their own secrets." I laughed, though it sounded forced. "You're being cryptic again, Poirot. I'm just here to help you solve this thing." "We to help," he said, his eyes never leaving mine. "And yet, I wonder, what is it that you see when you look? At this case, a tragedy, a puzzle, or perhaps a mirror?" I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach, but I raised my glass and took a sip, forcing a smile. "You're full of riddles tonight. Let's stick to the facts, shall we?" He inclined his head, still smiling. "As you wish, Doctor. But the facts, they have a way of revealing the heart of a man. And this dictaphone, it is a fact that speaks loudly." The conversation drifted to other matters, but Poirot's words lingered, echoing in my mind like the crackle of that cursed dictaphone. I knew I had to be careful, more careful than ever. The little Belgian was clever to clever, perhaps, and every step I took felt like a step closer to a precipice dot as I walked home that night. The village was quiet, the streets bathed in moonlight. King's Abbot seemed peaceful, but I knew better. Beneath its calm exterior, a storm was brewing, and I was caught in its center, the dictaphone, the chair, the footprints, pieces of a puzzle that Poirot was assembling with terrifying precision. And I, Dr. James Shepherd, the narrator of this tale, could only watch and wait, wondering how long it would be before the truth came crashing down. The days that followed were a blur of interviews and investigations. Poirot moved through Fernley, parked like a bloodhound, sniffing out inconsistencies in every story. He questioned Ursula Bourne, the parlour-maid whose nervous demeanour and lack of alibi made her a target of suspicion. He pressed Flora Ackroyd on her whereabouts, her eyes wide with fear as she recounted her movements. Even Major Blunt, the stoic family friend, found himself under Poirot's scrutiny, his gruff answers doing little to deflect the detectives' probing questions. But it was the dictaphone that haunted me. Poirot returned to it again and again, playing the brief recording, analyzing every word, every pause. "The letter, it changes everything," Ackroyd's voice said, over and over, until it seemed to echo in my dreams. "What letter?" I asked, myself, though I knew the answer. I had seen it, held it in my hands before it was destroyed. But Poirot didn't know that not yet. One afternoon, as we sat in the study once more, Poirot turned to me with a sudden intensity. "Doctor, you are a man of observation. Tell me, what do you make of this room, the chair, the dictaphone, the locked door? What story do they tell?" I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. "They tell a story of a careful killer, someone who planned this down to the smallest detail. The dictaphone was a trick to confuse the timeline, to make us think Ackroyd was alive when he wasn't." Poirot nodded, his eyes gleaming. "Very good, Doctor. But there is one detail you have not mentioned. The chair, why move it? It serves no purpose in your story." I felt my mouth go dry. I don't know. Maybe it was an accident. An accident. Poirot's voice was sharp now, cutting through the air like a blade. "In a crime so precise, you believe in accidents?" "No, Doctor, the chair was moved for a reason. And that reason, it is the key to everything." I forced a laugh, though my heart was pounding. "You're making it sound like I'm the killer." Poirot, he did not laugh. Instead, he leaned forward, his eyes boring into mine. "Everyone is a suspect, mon ami. Even you. The words hung between us, heavy and accusing. For a moment, I thought he knew everything. But then he smiled a small, enigmatic smile, and leaned back in his chair. "But come, let us not quarrel. We are partners in this, are we not?" "Partners?" I echoed, my voice hollow. Of course. That night, as I lay in bed, the weight of Poirot's words pressed down on me. The dictaphone, the chair, the letter, they were pieces of a puzzle I had created. A puzzle I had thought foolproof. But Poirot was no fool. He saw things I hadn't anticipated, connections I hadn't foreseen. And with every passing day, I felt the noose tightening, the truth creeping closer. The investigation continued, but the dictaphone remained the centerpiece. Of Poirot's focus, he questioned the household staff about its use, but no one admitted to touching it. Parker, the butler, grew pale when pressed, his usual composure faltering. Raymond, the secretary, offered vague explanations about Ackroyd's business dealings, but nothing concrete. Even Caroline, my sister, got wind of the dictaphone and began spinning tales of espionage and intrigue, her gossip spreading through the village like wildfire. One evening, as Poirot and I walked through the grounds of Fernley Park, he stopped suddenly, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "Doctor," he said, his voice low, "there is a pattern here, a rhythm to this crime. The dictaphone. It is not just a tool. It is a symbol of deception, and deception. It always leaves a trace." I nodded, my throat tight. "What kind of trace?" He turned to me, his eyes gleaming in the twilight. "The trace of a man who believes he is cleverer than he is. A man who thinks he can outwit Hercule Poirot." I felt a chill run through me, but I forced a smile. "You're determined to catch this killer, aren't you?" "Determined." Poirot's voice was soft, almost a whisper. "None, Doctor. I am inevitable." The words echoed in my mind long after we parted ways. Inevitable. It was a word that carried weight, a word that promised no escape. And as I walked back to my house, the village silent around me, I knew that the dictaphone. Deception was only the beginning. Poirot was closing in, and I, the narrator of this nightmare, was running out of time. The days blurred into one another, each bringing new questions, new suspicions. Poirot's relentless pursuit of the truth was like a tide eroding a cliff, wearing away at the carefully constructed facade I had built. The dictaphone, with its damning recording, was a constant reminder of my mistake, a mistake I had thought brilliant at the time, but which now seemed reckless, almost foolish. One afternoon, as we sat in the study once more, Poirot held the dictaphone in his hands, turning it over as if it held the answers to every question. "This device," he said, "it is a marvel, but also a curse. It captures the voice, but it cannot capture the soul. And the soul, Doctor, is where the truth lies." I nodded, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. "You think the dictaphone will lead us to the killer?" "I know it will," he said, his voice firm. "Because the killer, he has left his mark upon it. Not in fingerprints, not in evidence the police would find, but in the choices he made. The choice to use this device, to create this illusion. It tells me who he is." My heart pounded, but I kept my voice steady. "And who is he? Poirot? Have you figured it out?" He smiled, that same enigmatic smile that made my blood run cold. "Patience, mon ami. All will be revealed in time. For now, let us say that the killer, he is closer than you think." The words were a dagger, sharp and precise, and I felt them pierce the fragile armor of my composure. I wanted to run, to flee from that room, from Poirot's piercing gaze, but I knew I couldn't. To run would be to confess, and I was not ready for that, not yet. As the chapter of this investigation drew to a close, I found myself standing once more by the window of Ackroyd's study, looking out at the quiet village beyond. The dictaphone sat on the desk behind me, its presence a silent accusation. Poirot was out there, somewhere, piecing together the final fragments of the puzzle, and I, Dr. James Shepherd, the man who had woven this web of deception, could only wait for the moment when it would unravel. The truth was coming, as inevitable as Poirot had promised, and when it did, I knew it would change everything just as Ackroyd's voice had promised in that fateful recording. Chapter 8. Tangled least morning sun filtered through the heavy drapes of Fernley Park, casting long, dappled shadows across the drawing-room where the household had gathered. The air was thick with unease, as if the very walls of the grand estate were holding their breath, waiting for the next revelation to shatter the fragile calm. Dr. James Shepherd stood near the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back, his face a mask of quiet observation. His narration, as always, carried that peculiar blend of detachment and intimacy, as though he were both part of the scene and standing outside it, watching it unfold like a play. Hercule Poirot, diminutive yet commanding, stood at the centre of the room, his eyes darting from face to face with the precision of a hawk. His moustache twitched slightly, a sign that his little grey cells were at work, piecing together the puzzle of Roger Ackroyd's murder. The room was crowded, with the principal players in this grim drama, Flora Ackroyd, her delicate features strained with worry; Major Blunt, his rugged face betraying a flicker of unease; Geoffrey Raymond, the secretary, whose polished demeanour seemed to fray at the edges, and Mrs. Ackroyd, whose incessant chatter filled the silences but did little to ease the tension. Ursula Bourne, the parlour-maid, hovered at the edges, her eyes downcast but her presence impossible to ignore. Poirot's voice, when he spoke, was soft but carried an undeniable authority. As Amos, he began, his French accent lending a musical cadence to his words. We are gathered here because the truth, she is like a delicate flower. She must be handled with care, lest she be crushed by careless hands. Mademoiselle Flora, I would like to begin with you. Flora's head snapped up, her blue eyes wide with a mixture of fear and defiance. Me, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I've told you everything, Monsieur Poirot. I saw Uncle Roger that evening, and he was perfectly fine when I left him. Poirot tilted his head, his expression unreadable. Perfectly fine, you say, and yet, mademoiselle, you have admitted that this statement was not entirely true. Is that not so? The room seemed to contract, the air growing heavier, as all eyes turned to Flora. She flushed, her fingers twisting the lace of her handkerchief. I may have been mistaken about the time, she stammered. It was such a dreadful night. Everything happened so quickly. I thought I saw him at 9, but perhaps it was earlier. Perhaps. Poirot echoed, his tone neutral, but his eyes sharp. Or perhaps, mademoiselle, you did not see him at all after 8 o'clock, as you first claimed. This small discrepancy, it is most curious, non? A matter of minutes, and yet, in a case such as this, minutes are the difference between life and death. Shepherd shifted uncomfortably by the fireplace, his narration cutting through the scene like a knife. I watched Flora closely, her face, pale as she struggled to respond. There was something in her manner that puzzled me, a nervousness that went beyond mere grief. Could she be hiding something? Or was it simply the strain of being under Poirot's relentless scrutiny? Major Blunt cleared his throat, breaking the silence. Look here, Poirot, he said gruffly. Flora's been through enough. She's just a girl, and her uncle's been murdered. It's natural she'd be a bit muddled about times and such. Poirot turned to him, his eyes narrowing slightly. Muddled, Major Blunt? A curious choice of words. Tell me, were you also? Muddled on the night of Monsieur Ackroyd's death, you were, I believe, playing billiards with Monsieur Raymond at the time the murder occurred. Oui? Blunt nodded, his jaw tight. That's right. Raymond and I were in the billiard room from 8 until well past 9. We heard nothing, saw nothing. I've told you this already. Indeed you have, Poirot said, his voice smooth as silk. And yet, Major, I find it most interesting that 2 men, so engrossed in their game, did not hear the commotion of a man being stabbed to death not 50 yards away. The walls of Fernley Park, they are not so thick, I think. Raymond stepped forward, his usual composure faltering. What are you implying, Monsieur Poirot? That we're lying about where we were? I assure you, we were in the billiard room. Parker can confirm he saw us there when he passed by. Parker, oui. Poirot said, his gaze drifting to the butler, who stood rigidly by the door. Parker, who is so very attentive, so very precise, and yet he too has his little inconsistencies, does he not? For example, the matter of the chair in Monsieur Ackroyd's study, moved so slightly but so significantly. Tell me, Parker, did you move that chair, or did you see someone else do so? Parker's face remained impassive, but a bead of sweat glistened at his temple. I've already told you, sir, he said, his voice steady. I didn't touch the chair, and I didn't see anyone else in the study after Mr. Ackroyd retired for the evening. Shepherd's narration interjected again, his tone laced with a hint of unease. Poirot was circling now like a predator closing in on its prey. I couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy for Parker, caught in the detective's crosshairs. But there was something else, too, a nagging sense that Poirot was getting closer to something I couldn't quite grasp. Poirot paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. Let us consider, then, the matter of Mademoiselle Ursula Bourne, he said, turning his attention to the parlour maid. You, mademoiselle, have no alibi for the time of the murder. You say you were in your room, alone, but no one can confirm this, and yet you were seen earlier that evening near the study. Were you not? Ursula's head lifted, her eyes meeting Poirot's with a quiet defiance. I was in the corridor, yes, she said, her voice low but firm. I was on my way to fetch something for Mrs. Ackroyd. I didn't go into the study, and I didn't see Mr. Ackroyd after dinner. And yet, Poirot said, raising a finger, there is the matter of your past, mademoiselle. A past that you have been most reluctant to share. A past that, perhaps, connects you to someone in this very room. The room erupted in murmurs, Mrs. Ackroyd's voice rising above the rest. What's that supposed to mean? Are you suggesting Ursula had something to do with Roger's death? Why, that's preposterous. She's just a parlour-maid. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Just a parlour-maid. Madam, or perhaps a woman with secrets of her own, secrets that, if revealed, might cast a very different light on this affair. Shepherd's narration grew tense, his words spilling out like a man on the edge of a precipice. I felt the room closing in, the weight of Poirot's words pressing down on us all. Ursula's face was unreadable, but there was a fire in her eyes that hadn't been there before. What did she know, and why did I feel as though I were the one being watched, not her? The interrogation continued, Poirot moving from one suspect to another with relentless precision. He questioned Flora about her uncle's plans to marry her. Off to Ralph Peyton, a match she had resisted. You stood to inherit a great deal, mademoiselle. Poirot said, his voice soft but cutting, but only if certain conditions were met. Conditions that, perhaps, you found inconvenient. Flora's eyes filled with tears. I loved my uncle, she said fiercely. I would never have hurt him, no matter what he wanted for me. Poirot nodded as if satisfied, but his eyes never left her face. He turned next to Raymond, probing the secretary's financial situation. You are a young man with ambitions, Monsieur Raymond, Poirot said. Ambitions that require money. Oui, and yet, Monsieur Ackroyd, he was not always so generous with his wealth. Raymond bristled. I don't know what you're getting at. I was loyal to Mr. Ackroyd. I had no reason to want him dead. And yet, Poirot said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, there is the matter of the letter. The letter from Mrs. Ferrars, which Monsieur Ackroyd read just before his death. A letter that, perhaps, contained information that someone in this room did not wish to be known. The mention of the letter sent a ripple of tension through the room. Mrs. Ackroyd gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. What letter? What are you talking about? Poirot ignored her, his attention fixed on Shepherd. Dr. Shepherd, you were the last to see Monsieur Ackroyd alive, were you not? You spoke with him in his study, just before 9 o'clock. Tell me, what was his state of mind? Shepherd's voice in his narration was calm but strained. I felt Poirot's eyes boring into me, as if he could see straight through to my soul. I had to choose my words carefully, lest I betray something I couldn't afford to reveal. He was troubled, Shepherd said aloud. He mentioned the letter. said it contained something disturbing, but he didn't tell me what it was. He seemed preoccupied but not afraid. Not afraid, Poirot repeated, his tone almost mocking. And yet, within the hour, he was dead, stabbed in the neck in a locked room, with no sign of the murderer. A most curious state of affairs. Doctor! The room fell silent, the weight of Poirot's words hanging heavy in the air. Shepherd's narration resumed, his voice tinged with a growing unease. I could feel the noose tightening, not around my neck, but around my mind. Poirot was playing a dangerous game, and I was beginning to wonder if I was the one he was hunting. As the morning wore on, Poirot continued to unravel the tangled web of lies. He questioned Major Blunt about his feelings for Flora, a topic that brought a flush to the Major's weathered cheeks. I care for her, yes, Blunt admitted gruffly, but I'd never do anything to hurt Ackroyd. He was my friend, and yet, Poirot said, friendship, like love, can sometimes lead to desperate acts. Acts that, perhaps, one might regret in the cold light of day. The interrogation stretched into the afternoon, each question peeling back another layer of deception. Poirot revealed that Ralph Peyton, the missing stepson, owed significant debts, a fact that cast a new light on his sudden disappearance. Money. Poirot mused, it is the root of so many evils, is it not? And in this house, money flows like a river, touching every heart. Shepherd's narration grew darker, his words laced with a quiet dread. I watched as Poirot wove his net, each thread, pulling tighter around us all. Flora's tears, Blunt's stoicism, Raymond's indignation. Ursula's silence each was a piece of the puzzle, but the picture was still incomplete, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I was the missing piece, the one Poirot was. Searching for Dot by the time Poirot called a halt to the questioning, the household was exhausted, their nerves frayed to the breaking point. We will reconvene tomorrow, Poirot announced, his voice calm but resolute. The truth. She is close now, very close, but she requires one final push to emerge into the light. As the others dispersed, Shepherd lingered by the fireplace, his eyes fixed on the dying embers. His narration closed the chapter, a haunting reflection of the day's events. I walked away from Fernley Park with a weight on my shoulders, a sense that the walls were closing in. Poirot was relentless, his mind a machine that left no stone unturned. I told myself I was safe, that my story held together, but as I looked back at the darkened windows of the estate, I couldn't help but wonder, did Poirot already know? And if he did, what would he do with that knowledge? The chapter ended on that note of suspense, leaving listeners to grapple with the growing sense that Dr. Shepherd's narration was not what it seemed. The tangled lies of Fernley Park were beginning to unravel, but the truth remained just out of reach, a shadow lurking in the corners of the story. Chapter 9. The missing step-son's morning sun cast long shadows across the village of King's Abbot, its golden rays doing little to warm the chill that had settled over Fernley Park. Dr. James Shepherd, our narrator, sat in his modest study, pen in hand, scribbling notes that would later form the basis of this tale. His face, usually composed, betrayed a flicker of unease as he recounted the events that had unfolded since Roger Ackroyd's brutal murder. The village, once a haven of quiet routine, now buzzed with suspicion, and at the center of it all was the sudden reappearance of Ralph Peyton, Ackroyd's stepson and the prime suspect in the case. Shepherd's pen paused as he considered how to frame the day's events. The ink seemed to hesitate, as if mirroring his own reluctance to delve into the tangled web of truths and half-truths that Ralph's return had spun. The young man, tall and broad-shouldered, with a face that carried the weight of both charm and recklessness, had vanished the night of the murder, leaving behind a trail of questions and a pair of muddy footprints that matched his shoes. His absence had fueled the village's gossip, with Caroline Shepherd, James's inquisitive sister, leading the charge in speculating about his guilt. Now Ralph was back, and his presence promised to upend the investigation led by the enigmatic Hercule Poirot. It had begun with a knock at Shepherd's door just as the clock struck 9. The village constable, a nervous man named Davis, stood on the doorstep, his cap slightly askew. "Dr. Shepherd," he said, his voice trembling with the weight of his news. "Ralph Patton's been found. He's at the Three Boars, and he's asking to see you and that foreign gentleman, Mr. Poirot." Shepherd's heart quickened, though he maintained his usual air of calm professionalism. "Found, you say? Where has he been?" he asked, rising from his chair and reaching for his coat. Davis shook his head. "Won't say much, sir. Just that he wants to clear his name. The inspector's with him now, but he's insisting on you and Mr. Poirot." Shepherd nodded, his mind racing. Ralph's disappearance had been the linchpin of the police's case against him. The footprints, the missing money from Ackroyd's desk, and the whispers of a heated argument between stepfather and stepson had painted a damning picture yet. Shepherd knew that Poirot, with his little grey cells and maddening knack for seeing what others missed, would not be swayed by mere appearances. The Belgian detective had already turned the case upside down with his questions about a moved chair, a dictaphone, and the curious behaviour of the household staff. Ralph's return, Shepherd suspected, would only deepen the mystery. The walk to the Three Boars, the village's modest inn, was brisk. The autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves, and Shepherd's boots crunched against the gravel path. Beside him, Hercule Poirot moved with his usual deliberate pace, his small frame bundled in a neatly pressed overcoat. His eyes, sharp and bright, darted about, as if the very cobblestones might whisper secrets to him. "Mon ami," Poirot said, breaking the silence, "this Ralph Patton, he is the key, is he not? The missing piece of our puzzle. But I warn you, Shepherd, the truth is like a diamond, beautiful, but with many facets. We must examine each one carefully." Shepherd nodded, though he felt a twinge of irritation at Poirot's cryptic tone. "He's been gone since the murder," he replied. "If he's innocent, why run? It doesn't look good." Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign Shepherd had come to recognize as amusement. "Looks, Doctor, are the most deceptive of all. A man may run from guilt, yes, but he may also run from fear, from shame, or even from love. We shall see what Monsieur Patton has to say." The Three Boars was a quaint establishment, its low ceilings and wooden beams giving it a cosy, if slightly claustrophobic, atmosphere. Inside, Ralph Patton sat at a corner table, his hands clasped tightly before him. His face was pale, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion, but there was a defiance in his posture that Shepherd hadn't expected. Inspector Raglan, a stern man with a penchant for quick judgments, stood nearby, his arms crossed and his expression one of barely concealed triumph. "Dr. Shepherd, Mr. Poirot," Raglan said, nodding curtly. "Here's our man. Turned up this morning, bold as brass, claiming he's got nothing to do with the murder." Ralph looked up, his gaze flickering between Shepherd and Poirot. "I didn't kill him," he said, his voice low but firm. "I swear it, Doctor. I know how it looks, but I didn't do it." Poirot stepped forward, his movements deliberate, almost theatrical. "Monsieur Patton," he said, his accent lending a musical quality to the words. "I am Hercule Poirot. You have, perhaps, heard of me? No, a pity. But no matter. You say you are innocent, and I am inclined to listen. Tell me, where have you been these past days?" Ralph hesitated, his fingers tightening around each other. I was in London," he said finally. "I needed to get away, to think. Things were complicated with Mr. Ackroyd, I mean. We'd argued, yes, but it wasn't what you think." "An argument?" Poirot repeated, his eyes narrowing. "About what, precisely?" Ralph's jaw tightened. "Money. He was cutting me off, said I'd been reckless, that I needed to stand on my own. I was angry, but I didn't kill him." Shepherd watched the exchange, his pen itching to record every word, though he resisted the urge to pull out his notebook in such company. Ralph's story was plausible, but it was also conveniently vague. London was a big place, easy to hide in, and Ralph's absence had left the police with little to go on but suspicion. And yet, Poirot said, tilting his head, "You did not return to clear your name. You did not come to the aid of Mademoiselle. Flora, Your fiancé, who has been most distressed by your absence. Why?" Ralph's face flushed. "Flora and it's complicated. I didn't want to drag her into this mess. I thought if I stayed away, it would be better for her." Poirot's expression remained unreadable, but Shepherd sensed the detective was not entirely convinced. "And the footprints," Poirot pressed, "those found outside the study window, matching your shoes precisely. How do you explain them?" Ralph's eyes widened. "I was there that night," he admitted. "I went to see Roger, to try to talk things out, but he was already dead when I got there. I swear it. I saw him through the window, slumped in his chair. I panicked and ran." Shepherd felt a chill. Ralph's story, if true, placed him at the scene of the crime, but it also raised new questions. If he had seen Ackroyd dead, why not raise the alarm? Why flee, and why? Shepherd wondered. Did his own memory of that night feel so slippery, so difficult to pin down? Poirot, however, seemed unfazed. "You saw him dead, you say? At what time was this?" "About 9:30, Ralph replied. "Maybe a bit later. I didn't check my watch." "And you saw no one else? No one entering or leaving the study?" Ralph shook his head. "No one. It was quiet. Too quiet." Poirot nodded slowly, as if filing the information away in some mental ledger. "Very well, Monsieur Patten. You will remain here, under the watchful eye of Inspector Raglan, while I consider your story. But I warn you, the truth has a way of revealing itself, and Hercule Poirot, am its most persistent seeker," as they left the inn. Shepherd couldn't shake the feeling that Ralph's return had shifted the case in some fundamental way. Poirot, for his part, was silent, his eyes fixed on the horizon as if he could see the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. "What do you think?" Shepherd asked finally, unable to bear the quiet. "I think," Poirot said, "that Monsieur Patten is telling the truth, but not all of it. There is something he hides, something that frightens him, and you, mon ami, you must be careful. The truth, it is a dangerous thing when it is so close to home." Shepherd frowned, unsure whether Poirot was speaking generally or with some specific intent. The detective's words had a way of burrowing into one's mind, like seeds that would sprout only later when the light of understanding finally shone. Back at Fernley Park, the investigation took on new urgency. Poirot requested a meeting with the household, gathering them in the drawing-room, a grand space with heavy drapes and portraits that seemed to watch the proceedings with disapproval. Flora Ackroyd, pale but composed, sat beside her mother, Mrs. Ackroyd, whose nervous chatter filled the silences. Major Blunt, a family friend, stood by the fireplace, his military bearing at odds with the unease in his eyes. Geoffrey Raymond, Ackroyd's secretary, hovered near the door, his usual charm subdued, and Parker, the butler, moved silently, serving tea with a precision that bordered on mechanical. Poirot stood at the centre of the room, his small stature somehow commanding the attention of all. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, "the return of Monsieur Patten has given us much to consider. He claims innocence, yet his presence at the scene of the crime cannot be ignored. I ask you now, is there anything at all that you have not told me? A word, a glance, a moment that seemed unimportant but may hold the key." The room was silent, save for the ticking of the mantel clock. Then Flora spoke, her voice trembling but clear. "I saw Ralph that night," she said. "Before the murder, I mean. He came to the house, but I told him to leave. I was afraid Roger would be angry." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And what time was this, mademoiselle?" "About 8, Flora said. "Maybe a little after." Shepherd's pen, now in motion, recorded her words. Flora's admission placed Ralph at Fernley Park earlier than he'd claimed, contradicting his timeline. Was it a mistake, or was someone lying? Mrs. Ackroyd, never one to stay silent for long, chimed in. "I always said Ralph was trouble. Always borrowing money, always causing a fuss. If you ask me, he's the one who did it." "Madam," Poirot said sharply, "I do not ask for opinions, only facts. And you, Major Blunt?" You were in the garden that evening, were you not? Blunt nodded, his face impassive. I was smoking a cigar. Saw nothing out of the ordinary. And yet, Poirot said, the ordinary is often where the truth hides. A cigar, a footprint. A chair moved just so these are the threads of our tapestry. The meeting continued with Poirot probing each member of the household. Ursula Bourne, the parlour maid, admitted to overhearing Ralph and Ackroyd arguing earlier in the week, though she claimed it was about money, not murder. Raymond confessed to noticing a strange tension in Ackroyd's demeanour the day of the murder, but he couldn't pinpoint why. Parker, ever the model of discretion, insisted he'd seen nothing unusual, though his eyes darted nervously when Poirot pressed him about the dictaphone. Found in the study as the day wore on, Shepherd found himself caught between fascination and frustration. Poirot's methods were maddeningly slow, yet each question seemed to peel back another layer of the mystery. The detective's focus on seemingly trivial details, the angle of a chair, the timing of a phone call, the exact wording of a conversation felt like a game, but one with stakes Shepherd couldn't fully grasp. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Poirot and Shepherd walked the grounds of Fernley Park, retracing the path Ralph claimed to have taken. The study window where the footprints had been found was a focal point. Poirot crouched low, examining the ground with a small magnifying glass he produced from his pocket. Interesting, he murmured. The earth, it tells a story, does it not? Shepherd squinted at the ground, seeing nothing but dirt and grass. What do you mean? Poirot pointed to a faint indentation, barely visible in the fading light. This mark, it is not from a shoe. It is too small, too precise, a tool, perhaps, or something dropped in haste. And here, he gestured to a patch of grass, it is flattened, as if someone stood here for some time, watching. Shepherd felt a prickle of unease. You think Ralph was lying about what he saw, I think, Poirot said, standing and brushing dirt from his trousers, that everyone lies in their own way. The question is, what do they lie about and why? The investigation stretched into the night, with Poirot and Shepherd returning to the study to examine the dictaphone once more. The device, a modern marvel at the time, had been used to create the illusion that Ackroyd was alive after his death, a clever trick, but one that required access to the study and knowledge of Ackroyd. Habits. Ralph, Poirot noted, had both, but so did others in the household as they worked. Shepherd's mind wandered to his own role in the case. He was Poirot's assistant, yes, but also the village doctor, a man trusted by all. Yet his narration, which he continued to write in stolen moments, felt increasingly like a confession, though of what, he couldn't say. The narrator nightmare of the audiobook's title seemed to loom over him, a shadow he couldn't shake up. By the time they left Fernley Park, the stars were bright overhead, and Shepherd felt the weight of the day pressing on him. Poirot, however, seemed invigorated, his eyes alight with the thrill of the chase. Tomorrow, he said, we shall speak again with Monsieur Patten, and then, perhaps, we shall see the truth for what it is. Shepherd nodded, though his thoughts were elsewhere. Ralph's return had brought new questions, but it had also cast a spotlight on the inconsistencies in the case and, perhaps, in Shepherd's own account. As they parted ways, Poirot's final words lingered in the air. Be careful, mon ami. The truth is a mirror, and it reflects all. The village of King's Abbot slept uneasily that night, its secrets buried but not forgotten. Ralph Patten, the missing stepson, was back, but his story was far from complete. And Hercule Poirot, with his relentless pursuit of the truth, was closer than ever to unraveling the mystery of Roger Ackroyd's murder mystery. That would soon shake the village to its core. Chapter 10. Shadows of motiveth morning sun filtered through the heavy drapes of Fernley Park, casting long, wavering shadows across the polished floors. Dr. James Shepherd sat in the drawing-room, his notebook open on his lap, though his pen had not touched the page in some time. The weight of the investigation pressed upon him, a silent burden that seemed to grow heavier with each passing day. Hercule Poirot, ever the meticulous observer, stood by the window, his small, precise hands clasped behind his back, his eyes Fixed on the garden beyond, the air was thick with unspoken questions, and Shepherd felt the familiar prickle of unease that had become his constant companion. Since Roger Ackroyd's murder, Poirot turned, his moustache twitching slightly as he regarded Shepherd. "Mon ami," he said, his voice calm but carrying that unmistakable edge of purpose. "Today we must delve deeper into the shadows, the motives. They hide like mice in the corners of this case. Nests pause, but we shall coax them into the light." Shepherd nodded, though his throat tightened. He had grown accustomed to Poirot's theatrical flourishes, but there was something unsettling in the detective's tone today, a certainty that suggested he was closing in on truths Shepherd would rather keep buried. "What do you propose we do next, Poirot?" he asked, striving to keep his voice steady. "We return to the letter," Poirot said, his eyes gleaming. "The letter of Mrs. Ferrars, the one that Monsieur Ackroyd received. It is the key, I think, to unlocking the motives that swirl around this tragedy. Blackmail. Mon ami, it is a poison that seeps into many hearts." Shepherd shifted in his seat, his fingers tightening around his pen. The letter. Always the letter. It was the thread that connected the death of Mrs. Ferrars to the murder of Roger Ackroyd, a thread that Poirot seemed determined to follow to its end. "You think the blackmailer is the murderer?" Shepherd asked, though he already knew the answer. Poirot tilted his head, his expression unreadable. "Perhaps. Or perhaps the blackmailer is but one piece of this puzzle. The motives, they are not singular. Money, love, fear, revenge, these are the shadows we must explore. Let us begin with those closest to Monsieur Ackroyd." The investigation had reached a critical juncture. The household at Fernley Park was a web of interconnected lives, each person bound to Ackroyd by ties of blood, duty, or desire. Shepherd, as the village doctor and Poirot's reluctant assistant, had a front-row seat to the unfolding drama, but his role as narrator made him acutely aware of the gaps in his own account. He wrote carefully, choosing words that would guide the listener without revealing too much. Yet Poirot's relentless probing threatened to unravel everything. The blackmail angler Poirot's first target was the blackmail angle, the dark undercurrent that had surfaced with Mrs. Ferrars' death. The wealthy widow, suspected of poisoning her abusive husband, had taken her own life, leaving behind a letter that Ackroyd had received shortly before his murder. The letter, Poirot believed, held the name of her blackmailer, or at least a clue to their identity. But the letter had vanished, destroyed, or hidden, and its contents remained a mystery. Shepherd recalled the night Ackroyd had confided in him, his face pale and drawn as he spoke of the letter. She was being blackmailed, Shepherd, Ackroyd had said, his voice trembling with anger. Someone knew what she'd done or what they thought she'd done, and they were bleeding her dry. Ackroyd had refused to share the details, but the fear in his eyes had been unmistakable. Now, with Ackroyd dead, the letter was the missing piece that could tie the two tragedies together. Poirot paced the room, his steps measured and deliberate. "We must consider who stood to gain." From Mrs. Ferrars' silence, he said, "Who knew her secret? Who had the opportunity to exploit it?" Shepherd hesitated. It could be anyone in the village. Mrs. Ferrars was wealthy, and wealth attracts vultures. "Precisement," Poirot said, pointing a finger. "But we are not hunting vultures in the wild. Mon ami, we are hunting within the walls of Fernley Park. Let us begin with those who were closest to Ackroyd." Mrs. Ackroyd's ambitions first to come under scrutiny was Mrs. Cecil Ackroyd, Roger's sister-in-law and the mother of Flora. A woman of faded elegance, Mrs. Ackroyd had a penchant for exaggeration and a keen interest in maintaining her social standing. Her financial dependence on Roger had been a source of tension, and Shepherd had often overheard her lamenting her reduced circumstances to anyone who would listen. Poirot summoned her to the drawing-room, where she sat with a handkerchief clutched in her hands, her eyes darting nervously. "Monsieur Poirot," she began, her voice quavering, "I assure you, I had nothing to do with poor Roger's death. It's simply dreadful, all this suspicion." Poirot's smile was polite, but unyielding. "Madam, I seek only the truth. You were aware, perhaps, of Monsieur Ackroyd's concerns about Mrs. Ferrars?" Mrs. Ackroyd's eyes widened. Mrs. Ferrars, oh, that dreadful woman. Everyone knew she was no good. Poisoning her husband. Like that? I told Roger he should have nothing to do with her, but he wouldn't listen. And the letter? Poirot pressed. Did he mention it to you? She hesitated. Twisting the handkerchief, he said something about a letter, yes, but it was all so vague. He was upset, you see, and I didn't want to pry. Shepherd watched her closely, noting the way her fingers trembled. Mrs. Ackroyd was not a woman accustomed to deception, but her nervousness suggested she knew more than she was letting on. Poirot, too, seemed to sense it. Madam, he said gently, if you know something about this letter, it is best to tell me now. Secrets, they have a way of coming to light. Mrs. Ackroyd flushed. I don't know anything specific, monsieur. Poirot. But I did overhear Roger talking to Flora about it. He said it was dangerous, that it could ruin everything. I thought he meant the family's reputation. Poirot nodded, his expression inscrutable. Merci, madam. That is most helpful. As Mrs. Ackroyd left the room, Shepherd felt a pang of unease. The mention of the letter had stirred something in him, a memory he couldn't quite place. He pushed it aside, focusing instead on his notes. Mrs. Ackroyd's motive, if she had one, would likely be tied to money. She had no independent income, and Roger's death had left her future uncertain. But would she resort to murder? Shepherd doubted it. She lacked the nerve. Major Blunt's quiet loyalty next. Poirot turned his attention to Major Hector Blunt, the taciturn big-game hunter who had been Roger Ackroyd's closest friend. Blunt was an enigma, a man of few words whose rugged exterior belied a deep loyalty to Ackroyd. He had been at Fernley Park on the night of the murder, and his alibi reading alone in the billiard room was unverified. Poirot found Blunt in the garden, pruning roses with a precision that mirrored his military background. Major Blunt, Poirot began, you were a friend to Monsieur Ackroyd. Did he ever speak to you of Mrs. Ferrars or her troubles? Blunt's hand stilled, his eyes narrowing. He mentioned her once or twice. He said gruffly, she was in a bad way, being hounded by someone. Didn't say who. And you did not ask? Poirot's tone was mild, but his eyes were sharp. Blunt shrugged. Not my place. Roger was a private man. If he wanted me to know, he'd have told me. Shepherd, standing nearby, scribbled a note. Blunt's reticence was frustrating, but it was consistent with his character. The man was a soldier, not a gossip. Yet Poirot seemed undeterred. Major, he said, you were in the billiard room that night. Did you hear anything unusual? A voice, perhaps, or a sound from the study? Blunt frowned, his brow furrowing. Can't say I did. It was quiet. Too quiet, maybe. He paused, then added, I did hear footsteps earlier, though. Outside. Near the terrace. Thought it was one of the staff. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Footsteps, you say? At what time? Blunt scratched his chin. Around 9, maybe. Before all the commotion. Shepherd's pen paused. Footsteps at 9 o'clock. The timeline of the murder was tight, with Ackroyd last seen alive at 9:30. Could Blunt's observation be significant? Poirot seemed to think so, for he thanked the Major and dismissed him with a nod dot as Blunt walked away. Shepherd leaned toward Poirot. Do you think he's hiding something? Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. Everyone hides something, mon ami. The question is whether it is relevant to our purpose. Flora's desperation for Ackroyd was next, and her interview was fraught with emotion. The young woman, delicate and fair, had been devastated by her uncle's death, but her lies about seeing him alive had cast a shadow over her credibility. She sat across from Poirot, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes red from crying. Mademoiselle, Poirot began, his voice gentle, you have not been entirely truthful with me. You said you saw your uncle at 9:30, but we know this cannot be so. Why did you lie? Flora's lip trembled. I was scared, she admitted. Ralph was missing, and I thought if I said I'd seen Uncle Roger, it would protect him. I didn't know what else to do. Shepherd's heart went out to her, but he kept his expression neutral. Flora's devotion to Ralph Paton, her secret fiancé, was no secret to him, but her willingness to lie raised questions about what else she might be concealing. Poirot leaned forward, his eyes kind but probing. "And the letter, mademoiselle. Did your uncle speak of it to you?" Flora nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "He said it was from Mrs. Ferrars, that it explained everything. He was so angry, Monsieur Poirot. He said someone had been tormenting her, and he was going to put a stop to it. I begged him to let it go, but he wouldn't listen." "Did he mention a name?" Poirot asked. "No." Flora said, shaking her head. "He burned the letter. Said it was too dangerous to keep." Shepherd's stomach twisted. The letter burned. Another dead end. Or was it? Poirot's expression remained serene, but Shepherd could sense the wheels turning in the detective's mind. "Merci, mademoiselle," Poirot said. "You have been most helpful." As Flora left, Shepherd turned to Poirot. "If the letter's gone, how do we find the blackmailer?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "The letter is gone, yes, but its shadow remains. We must look to those who knew of its existence and those who feared its contents." The household staff. The investigation turned to the household staff, a group whose proximity to Ackroyd made them both invaluable witnesses and potential suspects. Parker, the butler, was first. His impeccable manners and unwavering composure had made him a fixture at Fernley Park, but Poirot was not swayed by appearances. "Monsieur Parker," Poirot said, "you were in the hall on the night of the murder. Did you see or hear anything unusual?" Parker's expression remained impassive. "Nothing out of the ordinary, sir. I was attending to my duties. I did hear Mr. Ackroyd's voice from the study around 9:30, speaking to someone." Shepherd's pen froze. Ackroyd's voice at 9:30. The dictaphone had accounted for that, hadn't it? Poirot's eyes narrowed. "You are certain it was his voice?" Parker hesitated, a rare crack in his composure. I believe so, sir. It was muffled, but it sounded like him." Poirot nodded, dismissing the butler with a wave. "Interesting," he murmured to Shepherd. "The dictaphone. It was a clever trick, but perhaps not as clever as our murderer thought." Next came Ursula Bourne, the parlour-maid whose lack of alibi had raised suspicions. Her interview was tense, her answers clipped and guarded. "I was in my room," she insisted when Poirot pressed her about her whereabouts. "I didn't hear anything, and I didn't see anything, and yet," Poirot said, "you were close to Monsieur Ackroyd. Did he ever speak to you of Mrs. Ferrars or her letter?" Ursula's eyes flashed with defiance. "Why would he? I'm just the parlour-maid." Poirot's smile was disarming. "Just the parlour-maid. Perhaps, but one with eyes and ears. You see much, Mademoiselle Bourne. Perhaps more than you wish to admit." Ursula's cheeks flushed, but she said nothing. Poirot let her go, his expression thoughtful. "She knows something," he said to Shepherd. "But whether it is relevant, we shall see." Caroline's gossip. No investigation in King's Abbot would be complete without Caroline Shepherd, whose knack for gossip rivaled Poirot's knack for deduction. Shepherd found his sister in the village, chatting animatedly with a group of neighbours. When he mentioned Poirot's interest in the blackmail angle, Caroline's eyes lit up. "Blackmail, you say?" she exclaimed. "Well, I'm not surprised. That Mrs. Ferrars was always a bit too perfect, if you ask me, and Roger, poor man, he was mixed up in it somehow. I heard from Mrs. Folliot that he'd been acting strange for weeks. Ever since that letter arrived," Shepherd sighed. Caroline's sources were often unreliable, but her chatter had a way of uncovering truths. "Did Mrs. Folliot say anything about who might have sent the letter?" he asked. Caroline leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "She didn't say, but I've my suspicions. That Ralph Paton, for one. He's always been trouble, running up debts and expecting Roger to bail him out. And then there's that secretary, Geoffrey Raymond, to smooth by half, if you ask me." Shepherd made a mental note to pass this on to Poirot, though he doubted his sister's theories held much weight. Still, her mention of Ralph and Raymond was intriguing. Both men had motives, Ralph's debts and Raymond's ambition but were They capable of blackmail, let alone murder. The web of motivations the day wore on. Poirot and Shepherd pieced together the web of motives that entangled Fernley Park. Money was the most obvious thread. Mrs. Ackroyd's dependence, Ralph's debts, and even Geoffrey Raymond's modest salary suggested financial pressures that could drive someone to blackmail or worse. Love, too, played a role. Flora's devotion to Ralph, Ursula's rumoured affection for Ackroyd, and Major Blunt's quiet loyalty all hinted at emotional stakes. Fear and revenge were less clear, but no less potent. Had Ackroyd's knowledge of the blackmailer's identity made him a target, or had someone else feared exposure? Poirot sat at the dining table, a map of the household spread before him, his finger tracing lines between names. You see, mon ami, he said, each person is a shadow cast by the light of their desires, but the true motive, the one that led to murder, it is hidden in plain sight. Shepherd's heart pounded. Poirot's words felt like a warning, though he couldn't say why. He forced himself to focus, scribbling notes to maintain the illusion of detachment. You think we're close to the truth? He asked. Poirot's eyes met his, sharp and piercing. Closer than you know, mon ami. The investigation continued, with Poirot questioning minor characters: a gardener who had seen a stranger near the estate, a maid who had overheard a heated argument between Ackroyd and Ralph. Each detail added to the puzzle, but the picture remained incomplete. Shepherd's narration grew more guarded, his words carefully chosen to avoid betraying his own thoughts. As night fell, Poirot stood once more by the window, his silhouette framed against the darkening sky. The shadows of motive, he murmured, almost to himself. They are many, but only one casts the shape of murder. Tomorrow, mon ami, we shall shine a light upon it. Shepherd closed his notebook, his hands trembling slightly. The truth was out there, lurking in the shadows, and Poirot was determined to find it. But Shepherd knew something the detective did not, or perhaps he did. The thought sent a chill through him, and he pushed it away, focusing instead on the task at hand. The motives were many, but the murderer was one, and as Poirot's investigation tightened its grip, Shepherd could only hope that the shadows would conceal him a little longer. The chapter stretched on, each interview and revelation building. Upon the last, a tapestry of suspicion and deceit that kept listeners guessing. Poirot's methodical approach contrasted with Shepherd's increasingly strained narration, amplifying the narrator nightmare theme that would culminate in the novel's shocking twist. For now, though, the motives remained shadows, flickering, just out of reach, as the investigation barreled toward its inevitable conclusion.